My name is Daniel Jones, and I work as a fire tower lookout in Yellowstone National Park. My tower is a metal structure bolted into rock at the top of a ridge, with a small square cabin sitting above the tree line and a ladder that runs straight up the center. The whole thing sways a little when the wind picks up, and when you're inside you can hear every bolt and panel shifting against itself like it's under constant stress. The tower I was assigned to sits off a narrow service road about 9 miles from the nearest ranger station. You don't just stumble onto it. You have to drive up a gravel road that cuts through dense forest, park at a marked clearing, and then hike the last stretch on foot. It's steep enough that you feel it in your legs by the time you reach the top, and the trees thin out just enough near the ridge to give you a clear view in every direction. That's the point of the job. You're there to watch. From the top platform, you can see miles of forest, thick stretches of pine and lodgepole, broken up by patches of deadfall, and the occasional rock formation pushing through the soil. During the day, you scan for smoke. At night, you log weather changes, check equipment, and make sure the radio stays operational. It's routine, simple, quiet. That's what I signed up for. I've worked enough jobs to know what I like and what I don't. I like being left alone. I like having something straightforward to do. I don't need a team, and I don't need a schedule packed with meetings or check-ins. This job offered none of that. The application process was minimal. I found the listing through a contractor that handles seasonal staffing for remote positions. There was no interview, just a short form asking about prior work experience and whether I could handle isolation for extended periods. I checked the boxes, sent it in, and I got a response 2 days later with coordinates, a start date, and a short list of supplies I was expected to bring myself. When I arrived at the ranger station, I met Eric Foster for the first time. He was already there, standing next to a white service truck with the engine running. Mid-40s, maybe older, hard to tell. He wore a faded green jacket and had a pair of work gloves tucked into his back pocket. He didn't introduce himself right away, just looked me over, nodded once, and asked if I had everything I needed. "Yeah, I've got what was on the list," I said. He opened the back of the truck and started loading my gear without saying anything else. There was no small talk, no orientation packet, no walkthrough of procedures, just a quiet understanding that we were heading up to the tower and that whatever I needed to know would be handled there. Well, the drive took about 40 minutes. The first half was paved road through thicker parts of the park, with the occasional passing vehicle or tourist turnout. After that, turned into gravel, then dirt, then something closer to a worn path than an actual road. The truck handled it fine, but I could feel every shift in the terrain as we climbed higher. Eric didn't say much during the drive. He kept both hands on the wheel, eyes forward, like he'd done the route so many times he didn't need to think about it anymore. I tried asking a few basic questions, how long he'd been working the tower, what the typical schedule looked like, but his answers were short and direct. "Few years," he said. Rotations depend on the season. Just watch for smoke, log what you see." That was about the extent of it. We reached the clearing just before noon. The tower was already visible from the road, rising above the trees on the ridge like a thin metal frame holding up a box. It looked smaller from a distance, but as we got closer, I could see the details. Cross-brace supports, ladder rungs welded into place, and a hatch at the bottom that led inside. Eric parked the truck and cut the engine. "That's it," he said, nodding toward the structure. Up close, the tower felt taller than it looked from below. You don't really get a sense of the height until you're standing at the base and looking straight up through the center. The ladder runs vertically with no breaks, just a series of metal rungs that lead all the way to the cabin above. The wind was light that day, but even then, I could hear the faint creak of the structure shifting. We carried the gear up in 2 trips. By the time we reached the top, I could feel the burn in my arms and shoulders from the climb. The cabin itself was exactly what I expected. Compact, functional, and stripped down to essentials. There was a desk with a radio unit, a set of binoculars mounted near the windows, a logbook, and a few shelves stocked with basic supplies. A narrow cot sat against one wall, and a small propane stove was bolted to the counter near the corner. The windows ran along all four sides, giving a full view of the surrounding forest. From up there, the park didn't look like something you'd hike through. Looked like something you'd, study. Every section of trees blended into the next, broken up by elevation changes and the occasional clearing. It was quiet and, it felt complete. No traffic noise, no distant voices, just wind moving through the trees and the occasional sound of something shifting in the distance. Eric set the last of gear down and walked over to the desk. He checked the radio first, turning the dial slightly and listening for a response. A faint burst of static came through, followed by a clipped voice reporting weather conditions somewhere farther north. "Radio works," he said. He flipped open the logbook and scanned the last few entries. Each line was dated, time-stamped, and written in the same neat handwriting. Wind direction, temperature, visibility, and a few notes about cloud cover. Nothing unusual. "Pretty simple," he said, closing the book. "You watch and log, and you report if something starts." I nodded. That all tracked with what I expected. He moved around the cabin, checking a few things. Window latches, the stove connection, a storage bin near the cot. Everything seemed routine. No surprises or complications, just a system designed to do one job over and over again. And for a while, that's all it felt like, a job. We stood there for a minute without talking, both of us looking out through the windows at the tree line, stretching in every direction. The sky was clear, and the visibility was good enough that you could pick out details miles away if you took the time. I figured that was it. Drop off, quick check, then he'd head back down and leave me to it. Instead, Eric reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded sheet of paper. He didn't hand it to me right away, just held it there for a second, like he was deciding whether to say something first. "These, they're not in the official handbook." I looked at the paper, then back at him. "What aren't?" He unfolded it once, then again until it was flat. "Rules," he said. "For what?" I asked. "For staying here." He stepped closer and handed me the paper. I took it and glanced down. It was a short list. 4 lines written in plain handwriting. No explanations, no extra notes, just 4 separate statements, each on its own line. I started to read the first one, but he spoke again before I got through it. "You follow those, or you won't last here." I looked back up at him. There was no smile, no sign that he was joking or trying to mess with me. His expression didn't change at all. He just stood there, waiting for me to finish reading. Well, I didn't ask anything else after that. Not right away, at least. I folded the paper once, and I kept it in my hand. From outside, the wind picked up just enough to make the tower shift slightly on its supports. The metal frame let out a low creak that ran up through the structure and into the floor beneath our feet. Eric turned toward the ladder hatch. "Well, I'll be back in a couple days." And then he opened it and started climbing down without another word. I stood there in the middle of the cabin, the paper still in my hand, listening to the sound of his boots moving down the rungs until it faded into the distance. And after that, it was just me, the tower, and the forest stretching out in every direction, and the list he left behind. Rule 1. Do not wear bright colors. Eric didn't explain the rules before he left, and I didn't ask him to. At the time, they didn't seem important enough to question. The job was simple. Watch for smoke, log what I saw, keep the radio on, and stay put. The list he handed me, it felt out of place compared to everything else in the tower, like something personal he'd written down over time, rather than part of any official procedure. I folded it once, set it on the desk next to the logbook, and went back to learning the routine. The first day was quiet. I woke up just after sunrise, checked the radio, logged the temperature, and ran a full visual sweep from each window. The forest looked the same in every direction. Dense green canopy broken up by dead trees and patches of exposed rock. No smoke, no movement worth noting. Just wind pushing through the tops of the trees in slow, steady waves. By mid-morning, the temperature had climbed enough that the inside of the cabin started to feel warm. I opened one of the windows to let some air through, and I stepped outside onto the narrow platform that ran along the edge of the tower. It wasn't much space, just enough to stand and move along the perimeter, but it gave a clearer view down the slopes and into the tree line below. And that's when I heard it. A low, buzzing sound, faint at first, almost easy to miss under the wind. I leaned over the railing, and I looked down toward the trees, trying to figure out where it was coming from. At that point, it didn't register as anything unusual. You hear insects in places like this all the time. The park is full of them, especially in the warmer months. It's part of the background. I went back inside, and I didn't think about it again. Around noon, I decided to organize the rest of my gear. I brought a duffel with clothes, some basic tools, and a few personal things to pass the time. Books, a small flashlight, extra batteries. Most of it fit easily into the storage bins under the cot. The rest I kept near the desk. One of the jackets I'd packed was bright red. It wasn't something I thought about when I chose it. It was a jacket I'd owned for years. Lightweight, easy to throw on, and visible enough that I'd used it before on jobs where being seen mattered. Out here, it didn't matter at all. There was no one around to see me. Well, by early afternoon, the sun was high enough that the light coming through the window started to feel harsh. I pulled the jacket on before stepping outside again, mostly out of habit, and I walked along the platform to check the view on the west side of the tower. The buzzing was louder this time. Not constant, it came in waves, rising and falling, like something moving through the air in uneven patterns. I stopped near the corner of the platform and listened, trying to track the direction. It sounded like it was coming from the tree line about 50 yards out, somewhere just below the ridge. I leaned forward slightly, resting my hands on the railing, and scanned the area. And that's when I saw the first one. At a distance, it looked like a bird hovering in place, wings moving too fast to make out clearly. It held its position for a second, then shifted sideways in a slow, drifting motion. Something about it felt off, but I couldn't place it right away. And then it moved closer. The shape became clearer as it crossed the open space between the trees and the tower. The wings were too short for a bird, the body too thick. It wasn't gliding or flapping in a pattern I recognized. It was just hovering, adjusting itself in the air with small, heavy movements. When it got within 20 feet of the tower, I understood what I was looking at. It was a bee. It was a bumblebee. If you went by the shape and the coloring, thick body, black and yellow bands, wings beating in a rapid blur. But it was the size of a basketball, maybe larger. Big enough that I could see the individual segments of its body and the slight twitch of its legs as it adjusted in the air. I didn't move. It hovered there for a few seconds, drifting slightly from side to side, like it was inspecting the space around the tower. The buzzing was louder now. And then another one came into view behind it. And another. Within a minute, there were at least 5 of them moving through the air around the tower, crossing paths, hovering near the edges of the platform, and then drifting back toward the trees. None of them moved fast. None of them made any sudden motions. They just floated there, steady and controlled, like they were following something I couldn't see. I took a step back toward the door, and one of them shifted direction. It didn't rush at me. It just turned slowly and started drifting closer to the platform where I was standing. The others didn't react. They kept moving in their own patterns, crossing through the air in wide arcs. The one that turned toward me kept coming, though. I stepped back again, keeping my eyes on it as it closed the distance. At 10 feet, I could see the texture of its body clearly, the dense, almost matted surface of its outer layer, the way the light caught on it in uneven patches. Its wings made a sharp, vibrating sound as they cut through the air. At 5 feet, it stopped. It hovered there, facing me. And then it moved forward. The impact hit my chest before I had time to react. It wasn't a sting or a bite. It was a solid hit, like being struck by something heavy moving at speed. The force pushed me back into the doorframe, knocking the air out of me and sending a sharp jolt through my shoulders as I hit the metal behind me. I grabbed the frame to keep me from losing my balance. But the bee didn't stop. It bounced off me and drifted upward, adjusting itself in the air like nothing had happened. The sound of its wings filled the air around the platform, loud enough that I could feel it in my ears. I pulled the door open and stepped inside. As soon as I moved out of the open space, the bee lost interest. It hovered near the edge of the platform for a second, then turned and drifted back toward the others. I shut the door and stood there, catching my breath. From inside the cabin, I could still hear them. The buzzing carried through the walls, low and constant, like a distant machine running somewhere out of sight. I moved to the window and looked out carefully, keeping my distance from the glass. They were still there, moving in slow patterns around the tower, crossing through the air and drifting back toward the trees. None of them came close to the windows. None of them tried to get inside. They just stayed out there. I stepped back from the window and looked down at myself. The red jacket stood out immediately, bright against everything else in the room, bright against the forest outside, bright enough that it was the first thing you would notice from a distance. I took it off. The buzzing outside didn't stop, but none of the bees came back toward the door. I folded the jacket and set it on the floor next to the cot, and then walked back to the desk and picked up the paper Eric had left. I unfolded it and read the first line again. Do not wear bright colors. I stood there for a minute, looking at the words, then back at the jacket. And the rest of the day passed without anything else happening. By late afternoon, the bees had drifted back into the trees, and the buzzing faded until it was gone completely. The forest went back to the way it had been that morning, still, quiet, and empty from a distance. But the rule stayed where it was. I didn't put the jacket back on. The next time Eric came up to the tower, I asked him about it, and he did not look surprised. Tried it, didn't you? He said, setting a crate down near the door. I didn't think it mattered. He nodded once, like that was the expected answer. They're not aggressive, he began. They don't come after you on purpose. Then why did it hit me? I asked. He walked over to the window and looked out toward the tree line before answering. They think you're something else. Something they're supposed to land on. I didn't say anything. He turned back toward me. You know, you wear something bright, they see it from a distance. They probably think you're a flower. Sometimes they try to settle, and sometimes they just bump you and move on. That did not feel like a bump, I said. No, it wouldn't. He picked up the jacket from the floor, looked at it for a second, then tossed it back down. You know, you're lucky it only hit you once, he began. We had a guy a few years back wore a yellow vest out here. Didn't take it off when he should have. What happened to him? I asked. Eric paused a second before answering. They lifted him. I stared at him, waiting for more. Not on purpose. They grabbed onto him, tried to hold position. Wings got under him just enough to carry him. And then? Well, they lost grip. Dropped him. He didn't die. But he did not walk right after that either. The cabin was quiet for a second after that. I looked back at the paper in my hand, then at the first line. Do not wear bright colors. Eric moved past me and started checking the radio like he had the first day, adjusting the dial slightly and listening for his signal. They're not trying to hurt you, but that doesn't matter. I folded the paper and set it back on the desk. And after that, I stuck to neutral colors. Greens, browns, anything that blended into the trees and the structure of the tower itself. I did not question it again, and I did not test it a second time. Rule 2. If you hear chewing on the tower, start spraying immediately. The second rule didn't make sense to me at first either. Chewing wasn't something I associated with a structure like this. The tower was metal, thick supports, bolted joints, reinforced plates. There wasn't anything up there that an animal could really get through, and even if something tried, you'd expect scratching or impact, not chewing. I didn't question it out loud. After what happened with the bees, I'd already learned that the rules weren't there to be debated. They were there because something had gone wrong before. Well, the first time I heard it was just after sunset. The temperature had dropped fast once the sun dipped behind the ridge, and the forest below had gone quiet, in the way it does when the light fades. I had the windows closed, the radio on low, and the logbook open on the desk in front of me. I just finished writing down the last visibility check when a sound came up through the floor. It was faint. A steady, uneven, grinding noise, like something rubbing against metal in short bursts. It wasn't loud enough to be obvious at first. I thought it might have been the wind shifting the structure, or maybe a loose panel vibrating under pressure. I stopped writing and listened. The sound came again. Short, repetitive, not random. I stood up and walked toward the center of the cabin, where the ladder hatch opened down into the tower shaft. The noise was clearer there. It wasn't coming from the walls or the roof. It was coming from below. Another scrape, then a pause, then a sharper sound like something cracking under pressure. I felt a slight vibration through the floor beneath my boots. And that's when I remembered the second rule. If you hear something chewing on the tower, start spraying immediately. Well, I moved to the storage bin under the counter, and I pulled out the sprayer Eric had shown me earlier that day. It was a basic pump system, about the size of a small fire extinguisher, with a hose and a nozzle attached to the top. The container was filled with a thick, oily liquid that smelled strong even before I opened it. Something sharp and bitter, like crushed wood mixed with chemicals. Cedar oil, Eric had said when he pointed it out, and a few other things. At the time, it hadn't meant much. Now it did. The sound came again, louder this time. Something was biting into the structure of the tower. I stepped over to the hatch, pulled it open, and looked down. First, I didn't see anything. The interior of the tower shaft dropped straight down through the center of the structure, the ladder running along one side, the metal supports forming a rigid frame around it. The light from the cabin didn't reach all the way to the base, leaving the lower section in shadow. And then something moved. A shape shifted near one of the support beams, just at the edge of where the light faded. It was large, too large to be anything I'd expect to see that high up on the structure. It clung to the metal at an angle, its body pressed against the beam. I leaned forward slightly, trying to get a better look. It turned. The movement was slow but deliberate, and as it rotated, the light caught the surface of its shell. It was a beetle, the size of a large dog. Its body was thick and segmented, covered in a dark, dull shell that reflected just enough light to show its shape. The legs gripped the metal beam tightly, each one hooked and jointed in a way that let it hold its position without slipping. At the front, its mandibles opened and closed in steady, mechanical motions. Each time they came together, they bit into the metal. That was the sound I was hearing. The mandibles clamped down again, and I watched as the edge of the beam shifted slightly under the pressure. Not much, but enough to see that it wasn't just surface contact. It was digging in. Another shape moved below it, then another. There were more of them. At least 3, maybe 4, climbing along the base supports of the tower, each one positioned at a different angle, each one biting into the structure with the same slow motion. The tower vibrated again under my feet. Pressure. I pulled back from the hatch and I grabbed the sprayer. The instructions Eric gave me came back fast. Don't wait or watch, just spray. I pumped the handle a few times to build the pressure, then dropped back down to the hatch and aimed the nozzle downward. The first stream hit the nearest beetle across its shell, and the reaction was immediate. It stopped. Not gradually or like it was deciding to move, it just froze. And then its legs shifted, gripping the beam tighter for a second before it pushed itself away from the metal. The mandibles opened wide, then closed without biting, like it lost interest in what it was doing. I sprayed again, this time sweeping the nozzle across the other shapes moving along the supports, and each one reacted the same way. They stopped chewing, pulled back, and turned. The smell of the oil filled the shaft, rising up into the cabin in a sharp wave that burned the back of my throat as I breathed it in. But I didn't stop spraying. I kept the stream moving, covering as much of the lower surface as I could see. One of the beetles shifted direction and started climbing upward, toward me. I adjusted the nozzle and I hit it directly across the front of its body. It hesitated for half a second, and then dropped. Its body fell through the lower section of the tower, hitting one of the cross beams on the way down, before disappearing into the shadows below. The others followed. One by one, they released their hold on the structure, and they dropped away from the supports, vanishing into the darkness at the base of the tower. The chewing stopped. The vibration faded. I held the sprayer in place for a few more seconds, waiting for the sound to come back. But it didn't. I closed the hatch slowly and stepped back, keeping my eyes on it like something might try to push its way through the opening. But the cabin was quiet again. The smell did stay, though. It hung in the air, thick and bitter, settling into the walls and the floor like it had nowhere else to go. I set the sprayer down on the desk, and I wiped my hands against my jeans, trying to clear the residue from my skin. A few minutes passed before I moved. I walked over to one of the windows, and I looked down along the outside of the tower. At the base near the supports, I could see movement in the fading light. Shapes pulling back into the tree line. Large, dark forms slipping between the trunks, disappearing into the forest like they'd never been there at all. I stayed at the window until the last of them was gone. And when Eric came back up the next morning, I didn't have to explain anything. He stepped into the cabin, set his gear down, and looked once at the sprayer sitting on the desk. "You used it?" "Yeah," I said. He nodded and walked over to the hatch, opened it, leaned down slightly, and looked along the interior supports for a few seconds before pulling back up. "Where were they?" he asked. "Base beams," I began. 3, maybe 4 of them, chewing through the metal. He closed the hatch and wiped his hands on his pants. "You know they come higher up each year." I watched him for a second. "What are they?" I asked. He didn't answer right away. He walked over to the window and looked out toward the trees. "Some kind of beetle. Not natural," he said finally. He turned back toward the desk and picked up the sprayer, checking the level of liquid inside. "Well, you did it right, though. Soon as you heard it, you spray. Don't wait to see how bad it is." I glanced toward the hatch. You know, if I hadn't sprayed, how long would it have taken? He didn't hesitate. "Not long." And the rest of the day went back to routine after that. Log entries, radio checks, watching the tree line for any sign of smoke. But every time I moved across the floor, I felt the memory of that vibration under my feet. and every time the tower creaked, I listened for the sound of chewing. Rule 3. Before nightfall, seal every opening in the tower. By the time I got to the third rule, I wasn't second-guessing anything anymore. I didn't need Eric to explain why it existed. I didn't need proof. The first two had already made that very clear. You follow the rules exactly as they're written, or you deal with whatever happens when you don't. This one sounded simple. Before nightfall, seal every opening. Every evening, just before the light dropped behind the trees, I went through the same routine. I checked each window, made sure the latches were tight, closed off a small vent near the stove, and slid the metal cover over the hatch leading down into the tower shaft. There were a few narrow gaps along the base of the walls and around the corners where the floor met the panels, but nothing large enough to worry about. Or at least nothing that looked large enough. The first time I heard him, it was just after dark. Not loud or obvious, just a faint, irregular tapping sound coming from somewhere below the floor. It didn't carry the same weight as the chewing from the beetles. It was lighter, faster, like something moving quickly across a surface and stopping in short bursts. I sat at the desk and listened. The tapping moved, one spot to another, then another. I stood up slowly and walked toward the center of the cabin, listening for where it was strongest. The sound shifted again, tracing along the underside of the floor, then up along one of the walls. It wasn't random. It was searching. I grabbed the flashlight from the desk, and I moved toward the lower edge of the wall near the cot. There was a narrow gap there, maybe half an inch where the panel didn't sit perfectly flush against the floor. I crouched down and angled the light toward it. For a second, I didn't see anything. And then something moved inside the gap, fast. A long, segmented shape slid past the opening, just within the edge of the light. It was too quick to make out clearly, but I saw enough to know it wasn't small. It filled the space behind the window as it moved, pressing against the opening just enough to show its outline before slipping past. The tapping stopped. For a moment, everything was quiet. And then something pushed against the gap from the other side. The panel shifted slightly. Not enough to open, just enough to show pressure. I stood up and stepped back. The movement stopped again. I kept the flashlight trained on the gap, waiting. But there was nothing. No sound or motion. I stayed there for a full minute before I lowered the light. And that's when I realized what I'd missed. The rule wasn't about closing the obvious openings. It was about closing all of them. Well, the next evening, I took more time. I went through the cabin slowly, checking every edge, every seam, every place where two surfaces meet. The tower wasn't built to be airtight, didn't need to be. But there were small imperfections everywhere. Thin gaps along the baseboards, spaces around the window frames, a slight opening where the stovepipe ran through the wall. Individually, they didn't seem like anything. Together, they were enough. I found a roll of heavy tape in the storage bin, and I started sealing every one. Window edges first, then the vent, then the base of the walls. I pressed the tape firmly into place, smoothing it down with my fingers until there were no visible openings left. It took longer than I expected, but by the time the sun dropped behind the ridge, the cabin was sealed as tightly as I could make it. That night, the tapping came back. Louder. Faster. It started near the base of the tower again, and then it moved upward along the supports. I could hear it clearly now, even through the sealed walls. Dozens of points of contact, all moving at once, climbing, probing, testing every surface. I stayed still, listening. The sound reached the level of the cabin, and it spread out along the exterior. And then something hit the wall hard. Not a strike, not an impact meant to break through. It was contact followed by movement. Whatever it was pressed against the outside panel, sliding along it in a smooth, continuous motion. The tapping followed it, circling the cabin, stopping and starting in different places, like it was mapping the structure from the outside. I kept the flashlight in my hand, but I didn't move toward the windows. The sound shifted toward the door. A faint scraping followed, lower than the rest, right along the base where the metal met the floor. I stepped closer, careful not to make any noise, and I angled the light down toward the seam. The tape held. Then for a few seconds, nothing happened. And then the metal flexed slightly. Something pushed against it from the outside, testing the seal. The pressure increased. The tape stretched, but didn't break. And after a moment, the pressure stopped. The tapping moved on. I stood there, listening as it traced along the edges of the cabin, moving from one point to another, never stopping for long. And that went on for hours. Eventually, sometime past midnight, the sounds faded. The tapping slowed, then stopped completely. By the time I checked the windows again, there was nothing outside but the dark tree line and the faint movement of branches in the wind. The next morning, Eric came by up with a supply crate. He set it down near the door and glanced around the cabin. "You sealed it?" "Yeah," I said. He walked over to one of the walls and ran his hand along the taped seam, pressing lightly against it. "Good." I hesitated for a second before speaking. "What are they?" He didn't look at me right away. "Centipedes," he said. "They're bigger than anything I've ever seen. And they're not just moving around, they're looking for a way in." There was a gap, I began. Small, I didn't think it mattered. He nodded once. "They don't need much." I let that sit for a second. "If one of them gets in, what happens?" I asked. Eric stopped moving. He looked at the floor, then back at me. "There won't be anything left of you." That was all he said. Later that day, I checked the exterior. I climbed down part way, and I looked along the supports and the outer panels where I could reach safely. There were marks on the metal, thin, shallow lines running in irregular patterns across the surface, not deep enough to do real damage, but clear enough to show where something big had moved. Near the base, I saw one of them. It was partially hidden in the shadow of the supports. Its body curved along the ground. Even at rest, it looked wrong. Too long, too flexible. The segments shifted slightly as it moved, each one adjusting independently as it repositioned itself. It turned its head toward the tower. Even from that distance, I could see the front of its body lift slightly, like it was testing the air. I climbed back up real fast without getting closer. And that night, I sealed the cabin earlier. I checked every seam twice, pressed down every strip of tape until I was sure it would hold. When the sun dropped and the forest went quiet, I was already inside with the door closed and the light off. The tapping started again not long after. It went on for hours. They couldn't get in that night, but they did not stop trying. Rule 4. If you see animals caught in webs, do not go into the trees. The fourth rule was the only one I followed perfectly at first. The first web showed up low between two trees just off the ridge. I spotted it during a morning sweep, just a thin line catching the light at the right angle. If I hadn't been looking through the binoculars, I would have missed it completely. It stretched clean from one trunk to another. There was a rabbit caught in it. Hung a few feet off the ground, one leg twisted in the strands. Wasn't moving. I watched it for a while. Nothing came for it. But I didn't go down. The rule was clear. If you see animals caught in webs, you do not go into the trees. So I stayed in the tower and kept watching. Over the next few days, more webs showed up. They didn't appear all at once. They spread slowly, one at a time, deeper in the trees at first, and then closer to the ridge, each one placed with the same precision, tight spans between trunks, different heights, some low, some high enough that they disappeared into the canopy. And the animals changed. Birds first, then another rabbit, then a coyote. And that's when I started seeing them. At first it was just movement. Something shifting above the webs, high in the branches where the light didn't fully reach. I'd catch it in pieces, something long sliding from one trunk to another, then gone again before I could focus on it. I kept the binoculars trained on that area longer than I should have. And that's when I saw the first one clearly. A spider. It moved across a web stretched between two trees, its legs placing down one at a time. The body was massive, easily the size of a small car, maybe larger depending on how much it was hidden in the shadows. The legs extended far beyond that, reaching from trunk to trunk without needing to touch the ground. It didn't rush. It didn't hunt the way animals do. It just moved slowly along the web. I lowered the binoculars and I stepped back from the window. I didn't go down. For the next few days, I stayed in the tower and I watched the tree line carefully. More webs appeared, more movement above them. Sometimes I'd catch the shape of another spider crossing between branches. Sometimes just the shift of a leg or the tension of a strand pulling tight. They never came out of the trees, not once. They stayed in the forest, building outward, filling the space between trunks with those same tight, controlled lines. The closer they got to the ridge, the more defined the webs became. And then one night, I saw the fire. Not at the edge of the trees. It was right in the middle of it. A small campfire, steady and low, glowing through the webs like it didn't belong there. I saw movement around it. People. 3, maybe 4. They weren't moving like they understood where they were. They were just sitting there, staying. Well, I didn't hesitate that time. I grabbed a dark jacket, a flashlight, and I headed down. And the forest felt wrong the second I stepped into it. Empty. No insects, no wind moving the branches, nothing but the sound of my own steps and the faint crackle of that fire ahead. The closer I got, the more I could see the webs. They were everywhere. Some were thick enough to catch the light from my flashlight in solid lines. Others were nearly invisible until I was a step away. I moved carefully, watching every step. And when I reached the clearing, I stopped at the edge. It was a family. 2 adults, 2 little kids, sitting close to the fire, packs on the ground, like they just stopped for the night without having any idea where they were. This area was supposed to be off limits. They looked up when they saw me. "You need to leave now," I said. And that was enough. They could see the look on my face. The man stood first, turning slightly toward the trees like he was about to ask something. And then he finally saw them. The eyes. They were everywhere. Low between the trunks, higher up along the branches, scattered in a wide circle around the clearing. Dozens of them, all fixed in place just beyond the firelight, watching us. Nobody spoke after that. I grabbed a branch from the fire and held it out until it caught. "Take one," I said. They all did. Each of them took a burning branch, holding it out in front of them. The light pushed back the dark just enough to give us space, but it didn't reach far. I could feel them above us. "Stay together," I said. "Don't run." We started moving. Slow. One step at a time, keeping the fire between us and the trees. The webs were everywhere now. I could see them clearly in the light, stretched across our path, some low enough to catch a foot, others at chest height. I guided the family carefully around each one. And that's when I looked up and I saw spiders everywhere. They were following us. Dozens of them moving along the webs above us. Massive bodies shifting between branches, long legs stepping from strand to strand without making a sound. Some were directly above us, holding position as we passed underneath. They didn't drop or rush. They followed. I think they were waiting for the right moment. The eyes stayed with us the entire time, just outside the light. By the time we reached the edge of the trees, my arms were tight from holding the branch steady. The road opened up ahead, clear ground, no webs. I could hear the spider's legs moving faster behind us. But the pressure lifted the second we stepped out, and the spiders didn't follow. They stayed in the trees, just watching from the edge. The family moved faster once they saw their car, but they didn't break formation. They got in, started the engine, and they looked at me through the windshield like they were waiting for something. "There's another road west. Take it," I said. They didn't ask anything, they just went. I stood there until the headlights disappeared, and then I turned back toward the trees. From the road, you could see them clearly. The webs stretched through the forest in every direction, and above them, they moved. When I got back to the tower, I didn't even go near the windows right away. I stood in the center of the room and I waited for my breathing to settle. Later, when Eric came up, I told him what happened. He listened, then looked out toward the tree line. "There's more than usual," he said. We burned it the next day. A full section of forest, cut clean along the ridge before the webs could reach the tower. The fire took fast, climbing through the strands and the dry ground underneath. I saw movement in the trees as it spread, large shapes pulling back ahead of the flames, retreating deeper into the forest. They didn't come out. When it was over, the ground was black. No webs, no movement. I've been in those trees once. That's enough. Most people who go in don't come back out. And I know I got very lucky. Well, after the burn, things improved. The section of forest below the tower slowly started coming back. First the grass, then the small growth. After that, the animals returned like they always do. Rabbits showed up along the ridge again. Birds moved back into the trees. A few weeks later, I saw a deer pass through the same stretch that had been nothing but ash not long before. From up top, it looked normal again. The job went back to kind of routine. Morning sweeps, log entries, radio checks. I still go down into the forest when I have to, clearing lines, checking sections the tower can't see. That part doesn't change. You know, the bees never left. You still hear them during the day, moving through the air in those slow, heavy patterns. I've seen them drift close to the tower more than once. You keep your colors dark, keep your distance, and they leave you alone. Mostly. The beetles come back too. Not every night, but enough that I keep the sprayer filled and ready. You hear it once, that chewing sound, and you don't wait anymore. And the centipedes. They never stop trying. Every night before it gets dark, I seal the tower the same way. Every seam, every edge, I don't miss anything now. But I can never fully rest here at night. They're always trying to get in. Everything out here, it's got a pattern. Everything except one thing. I haven't seen a spider since the fire, not one. No webs, no movement in the trees, nothing caught between the branches. If you looked at the forest now, you wouldn't even know they were ever there. But I don't think about it like that. Because out of everything I've seen out here, the bees, the beetles, even the...
The Indonesian island of Bali has long been sold as a type of paradise, a tropical getaway where people go to switch off, unwind, party and relax, safe in the knowledge that crime there is exceedingly rare. For the most part, that reputation holds up, but due to lax entry requirements post-COVID, in recent years, a handful of newsworthy cases have had some people re-evaluating their travel plans. Beginning around 2025, a number of targeted attacks, kidnappings and killings have been carried out on Bali, not by locals, but by organised, international hit squads. For example, in June of last year, an Australian national was shot dead inside a luxury villa by fellow Aussies who had travelled there specifically to settle a vendetta. In 2 separate incidents also from last year, a Southeast Asian man and a Russian national were both held hostage until cryptocurrency ransoms were paid. These weren't random incidents. And in February 2026, another name was added to that list. Igor Komarov. 28-year-old Igor is widely reported to have come from a wealthy and well-connected background, with some sources suggesting that he was the son of Sergei Komarov, the leader of a criminal syndicate in eastern Ukraine tied to scam call centers. Born into extreme wealth, Igor was used to the finer things in life, and that included luxury holidays. And so, in February 2026, he and his girlfriend, Yeva Mishalova, escaped the doom and gloom of their war-torn home country and travelled to Bali. Yeva was an influencer whose content predominantly focused on beauty, fashion, and flexing. Well, the grift was certainly going well, with Yeva amassing a following of over 200,000 people on Instagram alone. There, she updated her fans on her daily activities with Igor, posting photos and videos in real time, with captions, and with geotags. That meant that anyone keeping an eye on the couple knew exactly where they were. On Valentine's Day 2026, Yeva posted these photos, along with the caption, F the 14th of February, love you every day. These would be the last photos taken of the couple together. The following evening, Igor was out riding a scooter through the gym bar area with a friend who had joined him on the holiday, fellow Ukrainian Yermak Petrovsky, the son of an infamous businessman, Alexander Narek Petrovsky. While doing so, the pair were intercepted. Witness accounts, along with CCTV footage, showed a Toyota Avanza and 2 motorcycles block their path at about 10:30 p.m. A group of individuals emerged from the Toyota, grabbed Igor, and drove off with him. Reports on what happened to Yermak differ. Some say that in the chaos, he was able to escape. Others state that he was also taken, but that his family immediately paid a ransom for his release. Whatever the case, Yermak went to the police soon after the incident and reported what had happened, telling officers that the kidnappers still had Igor. As stated by police spokesperson Arya Sandy at the time, because the friend was released, we can only assume that Igor's ransom wasn't paid. That assumption was soon proved correct. On February 19th, 4 days after Igor was taken, this 3-minute video began circulating on Telegram. The footage showed a bloody and bruised Igor sitting in a blank white room with a swollen face and raccoon eyes. Through tears, he addressed his parents directly. Mummy, Daddy, I beg you, help me. You stole $10 million from a very, very serious organization. Return it, please. Igor then stated that his captors had already broken his legs and started cutting off his body parts. He then raised his left hand, revealing a bloody rag covering where his fingers used to be. As he showed off the wound, he explained that he felt feverish, said that infection would soon set in, and claimed that he felt like he was dying. If the money was returned to the harmed parties, Igor said, he'd be set free. If not, he'd be chopped into pieces, and photos of his body would be disseminated online. Don't contact the police or any mafiosos, he begged. Please, settle this directly with the people holding me. Bring me home at least like this, with what's left of me. But seemingly, his pleas fell on deaf ears. Igor's family remained silent. They didn't make any public appeals, and as far as we know, didn't contact the kidnappers or pay the ransom. In videos that appeared later, Igor read from a script, and admitted, under extreme duress, that not only did his father run scam call centers, but that he and his friend Yermak also started their own with the help of Yermak's influential father, Narek, saying that they targeted and exploited Russian citizens. Given the circumstances, it's unclear how accurate Igor's claims were, but the clips did prove one thing. Igor hadn't been targeted at random. For his captors, this was deeply personal. After pulling footage from cameras near the abduction site, law enforcement identified a rental car believed to have been the one used by Igor's kidnappers. They tracked it down, and blood was found inside its interior. The vehicle's GPS data led investigators directly to a villa in Tabanan, a quiet area removed from the more crowded tourist centers. Inside that villa, they found signs that someone had been held there. Blood found in one of the rooms was consistent with samples recovered from the rented vehicle. Then, on February 26th, something even more disturbing was discovered on the other side of the island. Fishermen near the mouth of a river noticed what appeared to be human remains. Detectives arrived and found 8 separate body parts scattered along the banks, including severed limbs and a head. Forensic experts reassembled them back into the shape of a person, but the doe had been dead for at least 3 days, and the face was too decomposed to positively ID. That being said, a tattoo on one of the arms suggested that it was Igor. Thus, they had several of the bones analysed. Igor's mother stepped forward and submitted a DNA sample to compare against them, which eventually confirmed everyone's suspicion. The body did indeed belong to Igor Komarov. In the days that followed, the police identified 6 suspects: 3 Ukrainians, 2 Russians, and a Kazakhstani, who all appeared to have travelled to Bali together for the sole purpose of capturing Igor and Yermak. It's strongly suspected that they learned of their whereabouts by monitoring Yeva's social media posts. 2 of them are believed to be lying low somewhere in Bali, blending in with the millions of tourists who visit the island every year, while the remaining 4 were able to flee overseas using fake passports. Interpol red notices have since been issued for their capture. With the suspects scattered across multiple countries, with possible ties to organised networks, it's unclear how long this case will take to resolve. What is clear is how much of it played out in plain sight. Because, in the days leading up to the kidnapping, Yeva had been innocently documenting everything. Where she and Igor were staying, what they were doing, where they'd been out to. At the time, it just looked like any other holiday being shared online. Little did she or Igor realize that among her 200,000 plus followers may have been people with a grudge, keeping an eye on every move they made. If there's one thing you can take away from this entry, it's that when it comes to posting on social media, never advertise your location in real time. You never know who may be watching. This message is sponsored by Raycon. With Mother's Day coming up, it's a good time to find a gift that actually fits into her everyday life. For example, my mum's constantly on the move. Whether she's walking the dog, running errands, or just catching up on calls, she's not someone who's just going to sit around with bulky headphones on. So this year, I'm getting her Raycon's Essential Open Earbuds. They sit just outside the ear, so she can listen to music or podcasts while still hearing what's going on around her, keeping things safe without sacrificing sound quality. And that's the big difference. Regular earbuds block everything out, but with these, you get both clear, balanced audio and full awareness of your surroundings. I live in a busy city, so I've been using my pair whenever I head to the gym. They help me stay aware while I'm walking there, and honestly are the perfect workout buddies. They're lightweight. The hook rotates so they stay comfortably in place while I exercise, and the battery life's solid. About 8 hours on a charge, and 36 with the case. Raycon's got over 3 million customers, and the quality holds up against brands twice the price. And if you're unsure, they've got a 30-day guarantee. So celebrate the mums in your life. Click the link in the description box, or go to buyraycon.com/masqueradeopen to get 15% off the Essential Open Earbuds. Thanks Raycon for sponsoring. Emma Amit was an up-and-coming food vlogger from Palawan in the Philippines who had an insatiable appetite for everything aquatic. The 51-year-old routinely searched the reefs around Puerto Princesa for shellfish and sea anemones, which she would both prepare and eat on camera, describing the cooking process and the flavor profiles of all of the local species. Her followers were enamored by her humble recipes, down-to-earth nature, and knowledge of local wildlife. On the afternoon of February 4th, 2026, Emma took to Facebook and uploaded a video of herself and some friends foraging in a mangrove for snails and shellfish. 3.5 hours later, she posted a second video to her account, showing them tossing their catch in a large pot along with garlic, onions and chili, before boiling it all in coconut milk.
Nagsalang daig mantika guys. Karabi ka mo risdingon ang among kaldero guys kay gumikan kay gilutuan namo na og saging. Ya di man matanggal. Ana bawang guys. Yan na unang luya, yan na pa yun na isidi guys. Kinhaso. Wow. Ang nagluto dahi guys akong anak guys kay iyang mama dili ka tubang anang kayo kay mainitan. Maglain dayon ang ginhawa guys.
It was a pretty standard video for Emma, and nothing appeared out of the ordinary. But unbeknownst to anyone, something else had found its way into the feast. A Zosimus aeneas, otherwise known as a devil crab. As its name suggests, it's considered the most poisonous crustacean in the Philippines. Its flesh and shell contain tetrodotoxin and saxitoxin, the same substances found in the liver and ovaries of pufferfish. Those toxins are lethal to humans, even in small doses, and crucially, they aren't destroyed when heated. Ingestion of the devil crab can lead to death in a matter of hours, with a mortality rate of around 50%, even with immediate medical treatment. And unfortunately, Emma was the unlucky diner who ate it. Later that evening, Emma began to feel discomfort, and the pain escalated quickly. Reports describe her suffering from symptoms consistent with severe marine toxic exposure. Numbness, loss of motor control, difficulty breathing, and convulsions. She was rushed to a nearby clinic, but by the time she arrived, her lips had already turned dark blue, and she was unresponsive. Another guest who had eaten a portion of the crab experienced similar early symptoms, but was also taken for treatment and survived. But Emma wasn't so lucky. She was declared dead on February 6th, 2 days after eating her final meal, a victim of paralytic shellfish poisoning. In the aftermath, local officials issued warnings about the risks associated with certain types of crabs found in mangrove areas. To the untrained eye, they can appear completely normal, no different from the edible species that live alongside them. But that's part of what makes this case so difficult to process, because Emma and her friends and family were seasoned fisherfolk. All of them were aware of the creatures that called Palawan home, including the devil crab. Though some tabloids have claimed, or at least implied, that she intentionally ate the crab for views, others think it's much more likely that while foraging, someone absent-mindedly tossed a small devil crab into their catch bucket. After being boiled in coconut milk, the crab's distinctive shiny shell may have dulled and appeared more like a non-lethal species, like a mud crab. A 54-year-old fisherman had died in Palawan just a few months prior after making that same mistake, giving that theory weight. However, some reports state that the crab wasn't actually cooked as part of the seafood stew, but later that same evening. Indeed, investigators later found devil crab shells in Emma's rubbish bin, still with their distinctive shine. Though locals found it hard to believe that Emma could have made such a mix-up accidentally, they were more shocked by the suddenness of her passing. One moment, she was happily sharing videos online like she always did. The next, she was dead. Online, one of her friends wrote the following: "You are like an older sister to me. I will miss you, always. I know you didn't want to leave yet, because you still had so many plans in life. But why? That's a question that will never be answered, because you're gone." If you've spent any time on the creepy side of TikTok or Reddit in recent years, you've likely seen this face, staring intensely through a grainy, VHS-style filter, accompanied by a date stamp reading January 1st, 2000. In online circles, this man is simply known as Zazor, and according to rumors, he may be the most dangerous man to have ever lived. The lore surrounding Zarzor sounds like a modern-day creepypasta. Viral videos claim that he's a notorious Moroccan convict and serial killer who terrorized the region in the late 90s, claiming the lives of hundreds of children while wearing his signature Adidas tracksuit. Apologies to all the Adidas pronouncers out there. Later, the legend of Zarzor was given a supernatural twist. He was dubbed the fastest man on Earth, with memes claiming he could run a staggering 48 kilometers per hour, and deepfakes showing him as a Usain Bolt level, and in some cases, cheetah level sprinter. Nowadays, in the world of analog horror, he's depicted as a glitch in reality, a man so fast that the police could never catch him, and his wide-eyed expression is often attributed to him being possessed by a jinn. In reality, Zarzor is nothing more than a creepy morsel of internet folklore, a story that built gradually, with each retelling adding or removing details, depending on the platform it appeared on. The fictitious Zarzor started out as a simple killer who evaded the law, but over time grew to become something otherworldly. But where did the myth originate? As with a lot of urban legends, its origin point is a bit unclear. As far as I can tell though, Zarzor has its roots in a different image, this one to be precise, which first began gaining traction at some point in 2015, when Middle Eastern bloggers began claiming it was a photo of Mr. Juan, a fictitious serial killer who beat his victims to death with an electric fan. Later, this photo was co-opted by a Facebook user who attached the text, "Invite me to your house." This is where the image began garnering attention on social media platforms. Looking at the more infamous analog horror image of Zarzor, it's clear that whoever made it simply took this man's face and superimposed it on someone else's body. After going viral, the gentleman whose face was used to make this meme was identified. His name is Abdul Aziz Farah, a man from Marrakesh who likely has acromegaly. It of course goes without saying that he's not a bloodthirsty former Olympian. This is just one of those cases where the internet took a photo from an unsuspecting person's socials and made him the center of a piece of fiction. Thankfully, Abdul wasn't hurt by his face being attached to such a dark story. In fact, instead of running away from the Zarzor meme, he started several social media accounts of his own and leaned into it, joking in live streams about his max speed and the so-called possessed eyes that made him famous. Honestly, he seems like a great guy, and I wish him all the best. Now for most people, that's where this whole thing ends, and until recently, that's where it ended for me too. But while doing some research for a different video, I stumbled upon an obscure true crime case and realized that a lot of the details were eerily similar to the Zarzor meme. Starting in the year 2000, 9 children, aged between 11 and 16, disappeared from the Moroccan city of Taradant. It wouldn't be until August 2004 that 8 of their bodies were discovered in the Taradant Valley. Next to one of their skulls was a note, which simply read, 12 October, week 41, Adidas 55, Hadi 2303, Adidas 5. Since each of the victims had worked at a local transportation hub, the authorities began looking into the names of road station employees and found one man named Najib Hadi. Since his surname matched that found on the note, they tracked Najib down for questioning, but he seemed to be genuinely confused about the entire situation. It was then that he revealed he had a brother named Abdelali Hadi, who worked at the same station as a night watchman. When officers arrived at his home in the Mahata neighborhood, Abdelali greeted them at the door and stunned everyone by saying, "I've been waiting for you to save me from my torture. I've been suffering day and night. I want to sleep and heal." At the station, Abdelali confessed to taking the lives of the 8 children found in the valley, along with a 9th victim whom he had hidden elsewhere. Though he had killed and buried them over the course of 4 years, on August 19th, 2004, he decided to exhume all but one of them and drive their bones out to the valley in hopes that they'd be discovered. He also explained that the note was meant as a clue for investigators, pointing them to a man named Hadi who wore Adidas sportswear. The number 55 was meant to symbolize handcuffs on both wrists, with 5 being Moroccan slang for cuffs. Though Abdelali seemed to express genuine remorse for his actions, he also admitted that he felt an immense feeling of satisfaction when he took each child's life. On December 11th, 2005, Abdelali Hadi was given a capital sentence, but died in prison before his execution could be carried out. As Abdelali's case spread beyond Moroccan reporting, it didn't do so in a single, consistent form. Instead, the language barrier meant that details began to shift. The number of victims became less certain. The setting became less specific, and in some retellings, Hadi's name and face were omitted altogether, leaving room for someone to take this true crime case, add a few flourishes, and blend it with their own Photoshop creation. Now, there isn't a clear line linking Abdelali Hadi and the Zarzal meme, and it would be misleading for me to suggest that the former directly influenced the latter, but I do think the overlap is unusual. Two Moroccan figures associated with Adidas sportswear who took the lives of children starting in the year 2000. Whether that's a coincidence, or something that quietly fed into the Zarzal legend over time, is impossible for me to say. But it is curious. In August of 2025, a short CCTV clip began circulating across Vietnamese social media. It showed the outside of a modest home in the Phu Mai commune, a semi-rural area in Phu Tho province. There was nothing unusual about the setting, just a concrete courtyard, a motorbike parked off to one side, and a house set slightly back from the road. For a few seconds, nothing happened at all. Then, a man stumbled into frame. He was clutching his torso, visibly unsteady, moving quickly, but without coordination. A moment later, a woman followed him out into that same courtyard, holding what appeared to be a knife. The people in that clip were 25-year-old Wen Tien Xuan and his wife, Hati Laiha. They had married young, reportedly when Xuan was 19 and Ha was 18. By 2025, they had already had a baby. Both of them worked factory jobs at the same industrial plant, and by most outward accounts, their life together was fairly comfortable. They lived in a part of the country where extended family support was common. Xuan's parents had helped them buy a house next to theirs so that they could assist with raising the child. Indeed, many neighbors called them the dream couple, as they seemed to have everything going for them. They had never so much as seen the pair quarrel, but things weren't as rosy as they appeared. On the morning of August 16th, before the couple set off for work, Xuan and Ha got into a heated argument. The disagreement centered on Xuan's wages, specifically his intention to lend some of his salary to his mother without discussing it with Ha beforehand. Resentment simmered throughout the day and into the evening when the pair attended an after-work company drinks party. It was only after they returned home, sometime after midnight, that things finally reached boiling point. Voices rose, accusations flew, and in a fury, Ha went into the bedroom and retrieved a small fruit knife. When she returned, she stabbed Xuan in the left flank, causing heavy bleeding. Xuan called out for help, and his parents next door rushed to his aid. When they arrived, they found Ha chasing their son through the courtyard, blade still in hand. They tried to reason with her, but it was obvious that she intended to stab him again. When Xuan collapsed on the ground, Ha seized the opportunity and rushed towards him, but Xuan's father managed to disarm her. Unfortunately, the damage was already done. As the family would later learn, the first and only strike had pierced Xuan's heart. He passed out there in the garden before help could arrive, and never regained consciousness. Still not satisfied after taking her husband's life, Ha approached Xuan's body and kicked him, prompting his mother to slap her in the face. Within hours, Ha was in custody. During her interrogation, she cried and said that she regretted what she had done. By the next morning, the case was already being reported by Vietnamese media, and the CCTV footage had begun to go viral online. As it spread, netizens attempted to dig up Ha's social media accounts. However, a plethora of fake accounts masquerading as Ha had already begun leaving false statements for internet clout, confusing the situation and leading to the spread of misinformation. Eventually though, Ha's real Facebook profile was found, and it was immediately clear to everyone that she had a tendency to overshare online, with there being countless updates saying things like, "Why blame me for being cold? When I gave my all, you didn't care at all. Is this all my life has to offer? You touch a little sunshine, and then comes a thunderstorm. What really drew attention, though, was what Ha had posted immediately after the incident. After taking her husband's life and walking back inside, she uploaded this image to her Facebook story. It shows Ha in black and white, still wearing the same blood-splattered clothes, a tear dripping from her eye. Was this a sincere moment of regret, or a way for her to frame herself as a victim? Given that she took the time to pick out an appropriately sad song to accompany the image, most have argued it was the latter. While Ha's profile gave the impression of a bored and unhappy wife, Zwan's was filled with messages of love for his son, and expressions of regret that he couldn't keep his relationship afloat. Shortly before his death, he had written, "If only life were like an hourglass, where you can turn it upside down, and everything goes back to where it started." In January 2026, Hatilai Ha was brought in for trial and sentenced to 19 years in prison. From a legal standpoint, that closed the case. But for Swan's family, it didn't really close anything. His parents have since taken custody of the couple's young child and reportedly struggle to talk about what happened, simply telling reporters, "If only this were a dream." Hi guys, Lizzie here, and thank you very much for listening. Before the video ends, I'd just like to say a huge thank you to all of my supporters here on YouTube and over on Patreon, especially my biggest supporters: Gina Valera, Connor Lawtham, Hamish, Alana Pons, Azrael Warakai, TNS Mum, Jeff, Hamish K, Jesse Jug, Asia Mina, George Lopez, Francisco Cappy, Farewell Tattoos Jax FL, Yokai, Terry Ford, Adelstein Tristerson, and Lila Kippy.
For some background, I lived in this house between the ages of 3 and 13. It was a semi-detached home that backed directly onto a church and cemetery. At the time, it didn't seem like a big deal, but looking back, it definitely did add something to the atmosphere. Now, a lot of different things happened while I lived there, and over the years my family and I have compared notes and realized we weren't imagining them individually. Let me take you to my earliest memories involving the basement, which wasn't very large, just a bathroom, a laundry room, and a small space where my brother and I would hang out, play video games, or watch TV. We never felt like we were in danger, but there was always this underlying tension when we were down there alone. On a few occasions, I remember feeling sudden bursts of cold air right near the bottom of the stairs, just outside the bathroom. At the time, I didn't think anything of it. I was a kid. I didn't have a framework to interpret that kind of thing. Years later, after we moved out, my family started talking more openly about that house. One night, my dad brought up the basement specifically. He used that bathroom every morning before work because he had an early commute and kept his work clothes down there. He told me there were multiple times when he would be down there getting ready and could feel the air move over him almost like something passing by. Most of the time he ignored it, but on a few occasions it made him uncomfortable enough that he spoke out loud, saying something like he wasn't there to bother anyone, he was just getting ready for work. He said when he did that, the feeling would fade almost immediately, and that's when we realized we had both experienced something similar in that same area. Another thing that happened involved the front door. When I was around 11, my mum went back to work, and I became responsible for walking my brother to school in the morning and locking up afterward. I was constantly reminded not to forget, and I never did. One day when I came home at lunch to let our dog out, I felt uneasy as I approached the house. When I got to the door, it was unlocked and slightly open, not wide open, but just enough that you could see inside. I immediately went to a neighbor, and they came in with me to check the house. No one was there, and nothing had been disturbed. The same thing happened again about a year later, almost exactly the same way. Both times I remember rushing through, letting the dog out, and leaving as fast as I could because I felt like I wasn't supposed to be there. When my dad told me about it later, he shared something that happened when I was too young to remember. We had been coming home from a New Year's party, and as they were driving up the street, my dad saw the light in their bedroom turn on and off again. When we got to the house, he left my mum, my brother and me in the car and went to check. The front door was unlocked and open. He grabbed a baseball bat and searched the entire house. But no one was inside. Things got stranger after that, especially with my brother. He started saying that at night he could see a woman in a long white dress, walking from the top of the stairs down the bottom and then disappearing. The staircase had a balcony at the top and curved down with 2 small landings, so you could see movement clearly from different angles. At first, I didn't believe him at all. Eventually, he told my mum, and she didn't dismiss it outright. Much later, after we had moved out, she told us she had seen something too. One night, she saw a woman in a white dress standing on the balcony at the top of the stairs. She never told us at the time because she didn't want to frighten us. I had my own experience connected to that area. One afternoon, I was in my brother's room, which faced the balcony, playing inside a Scooby-Doo tent we had. I ended up falling asleep in there. When I woke up, I rolled over and saw a woman in a white dress and a man in a suit with a top hat dancing together just outside the doorway near the balcony. They weren't moving quickly, just slowly turning like they were in their own space. I remember feeling calm, not scared at all. I looked away for a second and then looked back, and they were gone. It could have been a dream, but the image stuck with me very clearly. Another experience happened at night when I was in my own room. I always had trouble falling asleep, so I would lie awake for hours sometimes. One night, I felt unusually restless and had the urge to close my bedroom door, which I normally left slightly open. My bed was right next to it, so I leaned over to reach it. As I did, I noticed a large shadowy figure standing just outside the doorway. I froze completely. It didn't have clear features, but it had the shape and size of a person, larger than my dad and definitely larger than my younger brother. I started calling out for my dad, hoping it was him, but the figure didn't move at all. I called again, and there was still no response. Eventually, I pulled the door shut and turned away, trying to hide under the covers. A few moments later, my dad came in after hearing me call for him. He said he had been asleep, and so had my mum. That figure stayed exactly where it was until I closed the door. There are a few more things that happened in that house, including one experience my dad had involving a similar shadow figure, but that one could be explained away by sleep paralysis. Even so, the similarities between what he described and what I saw have always stood out. I guess that's what happens when you live next to a cemetery. This is a true story that happened on May 15th, 2006. In a small town in Illinois where I grew up. I had always believed in ghosts to some extent, because of the house I grew up in. For the first 10 years of my life, my family lived in an old place where strange, unexplainable things happened pretty regularly. I never actually saw anything there myself, but it definitely shaped how I thought about that kind of thing. The first time I ever saw something I couldn't explain happened years later, in a cemetery I used to visit often. It was an old cemetery on the edge of town. I used to go there just to walk around and clear my head. It might sound weird, but it was peaceful, and when my kids were younger, I even brought them along sometimes because there were gophers all over the place, and they liked watching them pop in and out of the ground. By the time this happened, my kids were older and had lost interest in going, so I would go by myself. I usually went in the afternoon around 2 or 3, walked a few laps through the ground and then left. On that particular day, I got there later than usual, around 4:30. I had had a stressful day and just needed some quiet, so I didn't think much about it at the time, even though it meant it would be getting dark soon. I always parked my car near the back of the cemetery, and before going out I had a habit of scanning the area to make sure no one else was around. It was a pretty isolated place, and I didn't like the idea of being alone there with strangers. That day, like every other day, I didn't see anyone. There's something important about the layout of that cemetery. There's only one real way in or out, through the front entrance. The entire place is surrounded by a tall fence with barbed wire along the top. The back section has a shorter fence, but beyond that is a steep drop down towards a river. It's not something anyone could just climb over or use as an exit. I walked around for a while, stopping here and there to read headstones, and after about an hour and a half I went back to my car to sit for a minute. It was starting to get to twilight, and I thought about leaving but decided to do one more loop before heading out. Like always, I check the area again before walking off and still don't see anyone. I haven't gone far, maybe a few blocks from where my car was parked, when I suddenly hear a voice call from behind me. "Hey!" It was loud and clear and definitely a man's voice. I stopped immediately. It didn't make sense. There was no way someone could have gotten behind me that quickly without me noticing. I had just been at the back of the cemetery minutes before, and it had been completely empty. I turned around. There was a tall, thin man standing there, wearing what looked like some kind of dark blue uniform. It was dim, but I could see him clearly enough to make out his shape and the way he was dressed. As soon as he saw me look at him, he raised his hand and waved, and then started walking towards me quickly. Everything about it felt uncomfortable. My first thought wasn't anything paranormal. I thought it was an actual person, and that scared me more. The way he appeared out of nowhere and began moving towards me without saying anything was setting off alarm bells in my head, and I turned and ran. I cut through the headstones to take the fastest path back to my car. I got in, locked the doors and started the engine, and then sat there for a moment trying to calm down, and decided I want to see who that was and where he'd gone. I drove through the cemetery slowly, scanning every path, but there was no one there. I went through the entire place, again and then again. Nothing. That's when it hit me. What I saw didn't make sense. When I first saw him, he looked completely solid. Nothing in the way people describe a ghost. He looked like a real person. But there was no possible way for him to disappear that quickly. And most importantly, there wasn't anywhere for him to go. He had been near the back, not far from where my car was parked. I had run straight back and immediately started driving. If he'd have kept walking, I should have seen him somewhere along the path. But he was just gone. I never returned to the cemetery after that evening. I wanted to share this somewhere because I still don't have a reasonable explanation for what happened that night. And honestly, it's been bothering me ever since. This happened a few months ago. A friend of mine had heard that the northern lights might be visible in our area and asked if I wanted to drive out into the countryside to try and see them. It sounded like a good exercise to get out of the city for a while, so we left after dark and spent a few hours driving around, stopping occasionally to scan the sky for what looked like a good vantage point. After a while, it became pretty clear we weren't going to see anything. As we were deciding what to do next, my friend mentioned that we were close to her hometown, and that she had been wanting to visit the local cemetery for a while to find some family graves. She had been doing genealogy research and knew roughly where they were. And it was a clear, warm night, and since the whole trip had been kind of a letdown so far, we figured we might as well make it worth it and stop there. We pulled onto a dirt road next to the cemetery and walked in. It didn't take long to find the graves she was looking for. She took a few pictures, and then we decided to just wander a bit. She was walking ahead, her foam flashlight on, lighting the ground so we wouldn't step on anything. And almost as soon as we got further in, I started to feel off. It wasn't fear exactly, more like a steady growing sense of anxiety that didn't match the situation. I've worked in cemeteries before as part of archaeological projects, including documenting and mapping of older graveyards, so I'm used to being in these environments even at night. I've always found them quiet and calming even, but this place felt different. I kept getting the sense that someone was behind me. I caught myself turning around over and over, expecting to see someone standing there. I tried to ignore it and chalk it up to my own anxiety. That's always the problem. It's hard to tell when a feeling is just in your head and when it isn't. After a while, we realized it was getting close to 1 a.m. and decided to head back. My friend's car was already in sight, and she was a few steps ahead of me on the path when it happened. I suddenly got that same spike of anxiety again, stronger this time, and I thought I heard footsteps running up behind me. I started to turn, but before I could fully react, something hit me in the back. The impact landed right between my shoulder blades. It wasn't a light push. It had real force behind it, like someone had actually thrown themselves into me, and it knocked me forward hard enough that I fell face first onto the ground. As I tried to push myself back up, I felt that weight again, pressing down on my shoulder and forcing me back down. At the same time, my friend had turned around. She later told me she had also heard something running up behind us. She saw me go down, and as she ran to me, she said my sweatshirt looked like it was being pressed inward, like someone had their hand on my back. She grabbed my arm and pulled me up, and right as she did, the pressure disappeared completely. We didn't wait to figure anything out. We ran straight to the car, got in, locked the door, and left immediately. Neither of us said anything for the first few minutes. Eventually, she asked me what had happened. I told her it felt like someone had shoved me. She said she knew because she had seen it, but there had been nothing there. We went through every possible explanation we could think of. It wasn't a person. There was nowhere for someone to come from or run to without being seen. I didn't trip. I clearly felt something hit me twice. It wasn't the wind. The air had been completely still at night, and it didn't seem like an animal either. There aren't any animals in that area that could hit with that kind of force and stay completely unseen, especially with her flashlight on me all the time. Nothing we came up with made sense. A few minutes later, after the initial adrenaline wore off, I started to notice pain in my back, right where I had been hit. It wasn't like a bruise. It felt sharp and stinging, almost like I had brushed against something irritating. I mentioned it to my friend, pulled over to check. She turned on the interior light and pulled back my hoodie. Just as she stopped, she said, "What is that?" She took a picture and then showed me. The skin between my shoulder blades was red, and small blisters had already started to form. Over the next few days, they got worse before they healed. It looked like a burn, but I hadn't touched anything, and my clothing wasn't damaged at all. Whatever hit me left a mark, and I didn't sleep well that night. Every time I started to drift off, I had this insane feeling that someone was standing right behind me, and that kept jolting me awake. Since then, it's been harder to ignore. I already deal with trauma from past assault, and there's nothing especially unsettling about an experience like this where there's nothing clear to point to, nothing to prepare for or avoid. And on top of that, it brought back recurring dreams I used to have when I was younger. They had mostly stopped in my 20s, but after that night they began again. The same presence, the same feeling of being watched or targeted by something I don't understand in some of those dreams now. It's not abstract anymore. I don't know what happened that night. There's no rational explanation I know. But if there's one I'm missing, I'd love some enlightenment, because I haven't been able to shake it since. Years ago, I lived in a very old small town on a cul-de-sac, which had a cemetery at the end. When I first moved in, the landlord told me that a lot of the people in the area had experienced a lot of ghostly activity, but that he personally didn't have any experiences in the house I was renting. Months went by, and I also didn't have any experiences, but then I started to see what looked like a black figure going through the house at times, and mostly in my peripheral vision. There were times where I would be laying in bed watching TV, and I would see this figure or silhouette move very quickly past the doorway. Because I was already told about the activity that my neighbors had experienced, I was never really bothered by it. It wasn't until a year after I moved into the house that I had an experience that really scared me. I was home alone and went into the bathroom to shower. My cat was in the bathroom with me, and I noticed her looking under the door, and she started moving her ear and swaying her tail, which she usually did when she heard something unfamiliar. I immediately locked the door because I got an uneasy feeling. I then heard a man say, "Hello?" I thought maybe it was my dad getting home, so I said, "Dad?" But no one said anything back. Then the knob to the door to the bathroom started turning itself as if someone were trying to open the door. I got into the shower and called my boyfriend to ask if he was home, and he said he wasn't. So I called my sister to ask if she was home, and she also said no. I started to panic and called my boyfriend back and explained what was going on. He told me to stay in the bathroom with a door locked until I heard his voice telling me to open the door. All of a sudden, I started hearing what sounded like my house being ransacked. The doors were being opened and slammed closed. It sounded like things were being thrown and broken. I was thinking someone broke into my house and was robbing me and destroying everything in the process. About 5 minutes later, I heard my boyfriend telling me to open the door. I immediately started crying because I was expecting to walk out to a disaster. But when I opened the door, nothing was touched. He said the front door was locked and he searched the house and no one was there. What I was hearing was so real and so scary. I have no clue what it was and still feel so afraid about that experience. I don't understand how I could hear all of that and yet nothing be touched. This happened back in October, and it was the first time anything like this had ever happened to me in broad daylight. I was on vacation with my parents in Salem, which had been my top choice for years. I've always been into creepy history, especially the Salem witch trials. So when my parents gave me the option between Rhode Island or Salem for my graduation trip, there was no debate. We went the week before Halloween, which thankfully meant the whole place hadn't been overrun yet. I had the entire trip planned out in detail, and one of the places I really wanted to visit was the Howard Street Cemetery. I originally wanted to go to the old Burying Point Cemetery, but it was closed for renovations at the time. Howard Street has its own reputation though. It's believed to be the location where Giles Corey was pressed to death during the trials, which already gave the place that creepy atmosphere before we even got there. When we arrived, I did my usual thing. I enjoy taking pictures of older gravestones, especially the ones that are broken down or partially covered. If I see one buried under leaves or debris, I'll clear it off before taking a picture. It just feels respectful, like you're acknowledging that someone is still there. I ended up doing that with a few graves while we were walking around. At one point, I noticed another woman enter the cemetery, but I didn't really pay attention to her after that. I was focused on taking photos and just being in the moment. Eventually, my parents started heading towards the exit, so I followed behind them, still looking around and taking a few last pictures. And right before we left, I felt something grab my arm. Not brush against it, not a light tap. It felt like a hand wrapping around my arm, gentle but very deliberate, and it caught me completely off guard. I don't like being touched, so my immediate reaction was to turn around, assuming it was the woman I had seen earlier. There was no one there. The cemetery behind me was empty. The area outside the fence was empty. My parents were a few steps ahead of me, and whatever grabbed me had come from behind. There wasn't anyone close enough for it to make sense. My mum noticed I stopped and asked what was wrong. I told her I thought someone had grabbed me, maybe that woman. She immediately said the woman had already left a while ago. And at that point she didn't even hesitate. She just grabbed my arm and started pulling me towards the exit. She doesn't mess around with anything even remotely paranormal, and she clearly didn't want to stick around. The weirdest part is that it didn't feel aggressive at all. There was no force behind it, no sense of anger or threat. If anything, it felt like whoever or whatever it was didn't want me to leave. I've gone over it a lot since then, trying to make sense of it. The only explanation I can come up with are either something in the cemetery acknowledging what I was doing, or that it was more personal. Part of me wonders if it had something to do with the graves I cleared off. Maybe it was someone connected to one of them, reacting to the fact someone took a moment to acknowledge their resting place instead of treating it like a backdrop. The cemetery wasn't especially well cared for, and there were empty bottles and trash scattered around, so it stood out that someone was being respectful. The other possibility is something my mum brought up afterwards. My aunt passed away from cancer years ago, and it hit me hard. She was a huge influence on me growing up, especially with my interest in anything dark or unusual. She loved anything related to witches, which makes the timing and location feel strange. At the very least, her ashes were scattered somewhere along the Massachusetts coast, not far from where we were. The idea that it could have been her isn't something I can prove, and I'm not saying that's what it was. But the feeling of the grab, how calm and familiar it felt, makes it hard to completely dismiss. Either way, I don't entirely know what it was, but I know it was paranormal at any rate. I'm an Eagle Scout, and I spent a lot of time camping over the years. One place I kept going back to was First Landing State Park. It used to be called Seashore State Park. There are a lot of stories tied to the land, especially about the Native American tribes who lived there long before anything else was built. People talk a lot about the burial grounds on the trail side of the park, which are fenced off now and no one goes in there. And the general consensus is that you leave that area alone. One night a few friends and I were at one of the campsites we always tried to book. It was a quiet night, with the cicadas humming in the background. We were sitting around the fire, telling ghost stories and trying to frighten each other, when eventually we got bored, and decided to go for a walk, maybe to head towards the beach. It was around 1 a.m. when we started noticing lights in the trees. At first it was nothing unusual, just small dim flickerings between the branches. We assumed fireflies and didn't pay it much attention. But the further we walked in, the more of them there were. Not just 1 or 2 here or there, but enough that it started to feel bizarre. They weren't lighting up in that random blinking pattern you'd expect either. I guess you could say it felt more deliberate, and for some reason we ended up crossing Shore Drive and heading towards the area where the burial grounds are. As we got closer, the atmosphere changed significantly. It got cooler. It felt contained, like stepping into a different pocket of air, and at the same time the lights we'd just seen stopped completely. We stopped maybe 10 steps short of it, and no one said anything for a minute. Then one of us quietly said that we should probably just leave it alone. We stood there for a moment, kind of awkwardly, and then someone muttered a quick, "Thank you," under their breath. We all followed suit in our own way, and turned around and began heading back. During the walk back, it felt different. It wasn't just that we were on edge, it actually felt like we were being moved along. Not like pushed or anything, but more sort of encouraged to keep going, although no one said anything. I've been back to that park plenty of times since then, and I've had other moments there that I can't really explain away. I've seen shapes moving through the trees at night that don't match anything solid. I've heard what sounds like distant drums and low chanting when everything should be completely quiet, and footsteps when no one else is around. What's strange is that it's never felt threatening. Unsettling, certainly, but never hostile. I've taken friends with different backgrounds over the years, including some with native ancestry, and almost all of them have said the same thing without prompting. It's still one of my favorite places to camp, but I don't mess around near the side of the park anymore. And if you go at night, maybe you'll find out what I'm talking about. About 16 years ago, I was filming a low-budget horror movie in a very old historic cemetery. We had permission. It was late at night and extremely dark. There were no nearby streetlights or buildings, so without our equipment, the cemetery would have been in total darkness. For one shot, we had a very simple lighting setup, a regular light bulb inside a paper lantern to soften the light. very low budget filmmaking. But for the shot we needed more brightness, so we removed the paper lantern. We now had a hot bare bulb and nowhere convenient to place it. The only flat surface nearby was on the top of a large headstone. We all felt a little weird about putting it there, but it seemed harmless enough, so we carefully placed the bulb on top of the stone and rolled camera. When I called action, the light suddenly dimmed. Not flickering or going out, mind you, it just noticeably dimmed. The strange thing was the bulb wasn't connected to a dimmer switch, and I'm pretty sure it wasn't a dimmable bulb anyway. So we picked the bulb off the headstone, and immediately, everyone noticed that it returned to full brightness. To test it, we placed the bulb on the headstone again, and the light dimmed. At this point, we started checking everything: power source, cables, bulb, connections, but nothing explained why the brightness changed only when it was sitting on that headstone. One of the crew members looked down at the grave marker, read the name engraved on it aloud, and jokingly but politely asked if we could film our scene there. We stood there for a moment in silence and then placed the bulb back on the headstone, and this time it stayed fully bright. We called action again, and the light never dimmed. When we wrapped up for the night, we thanked the potential spirit just in case and packed up our equipment. To this day, I still wonder if it was just a strange coincidence, or if whoever was buried there just wanted a little bit of respect. I've never really had an explanation for the following story, and I've always been pretty skeptical when it comes to anything paranormal. Let me share it with you. A few years ago, I was out at night with some friends, and one of us had the idea to go into the town's graveyard. None of us actually expected anything to happen, but we went anyway, mostly just to mess around and scare ourselves a little. We walked in and headed directly to the middle of the cemetery. We had barely been there a minute when one of my friends suddenly screamed. It was loud enough that it instantly set everyone off, and I turned to look at her, and she said she had just seen something move really fast behind us crossing the path. She couldn't really describe it clearly, just that it was quick and low and definitely there. And that was enough for us. We panicked immediately and started running towards the nearest exit without even questioning it. While I was running, something happened that I can't explain. I felt something pass me on my right side. It wasn't just a vague feeling either. It was close. At the same time, I heard footsteps in the leaves. They were fast and matching our pace, and it sounded like someone running alongside us just out of sight. It was the weirdest part, because it almost felt like I could see it, even though I couldn't, like my brain was trying to fill in the shape. So anyway, we got out of the graveyard pretty quickly after that, and did not stop running until we were a good distance away. Once we finally slowed down, we started talking about what had just happened, trying to piece it together. The same friend who had screamed first told us what she saw more clearly. She said whatever it was had come up on her left side, crossed the path behind us, and then kept moving in the same direction we were running. She specifically said it passed right by me on my right side. And the weird part is, that is exactly where I heard and felt someone move next to me. She wasn't guessing or trying to match what I said either. She told her version first, and then I lined it up almost perfectly with my own experience. None of us saw a full figure. Nothing you could point to and say it was that. But it's freaky that we both experienced something similar and had matching stories in that graveyard. My friends and I used to have a paranormal research group. We had heard stories of an old abandoned graveyard. It was on a hill overlooking the PD River in Mechanicsville, South Carolina. It had been owned by a church that later burnt down and was relocated. Most of the graves were sunken, and most of the tombstones were broken or gone outright. They placed a huge group marker with the names of the known burials on it. The story said it was haunted by the spirit of a young child in antebellum clothes and a black shadow with red eyes tied to a story about a man who brought his victims to the graveyard because it was so remote to end their lives. We were excited to be there. When we arrived, the first thing we noticed was it was pitch black. It was so dark you couldn't see your hand in front of your face. It was because the graveyard was so overgrown with forest that it blocked out all the stars and moonlight. It was hot and muggy that night, but when you entered the graveyard, the whole thing was a massive cold spot. It must have been 85 degrees outside, but inside, our thermometer read 62. There was a feeling of dread around the place, like something didn't want you there. And when you entered, the air felt thick, like it was resisting you, and pushed you back. It was harder and harder to walk the further you went in. Finally, there was a sound like something rushing towards us, and we saw what looked like a black shadow with red eyes moving towards us. We ran out of there, and it was like the trees themselves were against, as it felt like they closed in and gripped our clothes, holding on as we tried to leave. We finally made it out, and when we went to leave, one of the car batteries was dead, though it was only months old, like something had drained it. We called a local tow truck, but the driver refused to go until morning because he said it was evil and haunted at night. We got pictures with so many orbs and shadows. One picture even showed moss that looked like a man shape hanging from a tree. We also got full EVPs of what sounded like angry whispers. We never did go back. One boring summer night, my friends and I were racking our brains trying to think of a cheap thrill to entertain us, and someone floated the idea of sneaking into this huge historic cemetery with graves from the 17 and 1800s out in the next town over. We had been there a few times before, but never at night, and it took us a little while longer to get there than normal. While going at night, certainly we had more of a thrill than going in the daytime, and it also meant the place was much harder to find, and when I say the boonies I mean it, way into the woods with the only lamppost for miles being the one in the front of the cemetery, but we found it. The friend who drove us, Matt, parked a little way down the road, close enough so we could get back to it quickly, but just beyond the light the lamppost radiated. Matt warned us to keep quiet, as the caretaker had a house somewhere on the grounds, and we followed his lead until we found a place we deemed safe. It was the top of a small hill which in the daytime would have been a wonderful view of the cemetery, which was really quite beautiful, but at night offered the sanctuary for us to smoke weed away from prying eyes. We chatted, passing the vape pen around, when I looked down the hill at the road. Guys? Standing near the lamppost was a man staring directly at us. We waited for a second, expecting him to yell at us or tell us to leave, but he stood there in silence, standing so still it felt unnatural. Everything about his appearance was obscured. The light shining behind him made him appear as a jet black figure. Based on his outline, we could tell he was wearing a hoodie with the hood up, but that was it. Matt pulled out his knife. Okay, time to go, and we shuffled back down the hill, as quickly and quietly as we could, praying the guy wouldn't start chasing us. We made it to the car safely, but severely unnerved. Some of us were more willing to admit that than others. Who the hell was that guy? What did he want? Probably some guy just looking to scare us, Matt said, and another friend Richard replied, I don't know, that was too weird. Eventually the word we were all waiting for came up. Ghost? Seriously? Matt said. The last graves buried there at that point were from over 100 years ago at least. A ghost from the 1800s in a hoodie? Fair point. But that didn't make the regular human theory any more plausible. This place was way out in the woods with nothing around for miles. No cars or gas stations. Hell, that was the one and only lamppost the road had. There was no public transportation that used the road the man could have been waiting for, because why would you need a bus stop on a back road in the middle of nowhere? He could have just been somewhere walking along the road, but to where and how? We had enough trouble making our way there in a car with headlights. This guy would have had to have been walking along the road for miles and miles through the pitch black woods at 2 a.m. There was just no conceivable reason why someone would be there at that hour. The conclusion we all settled on was that it had to have been the caretaker. He must have known we were there and thought it'd be fun to pull a Scooby-Doo scare on some meddling kids. But we all knew that didn't sit right either. It just seemed way too impractical. Calling the cops must have made much more sense. Matt did have a knife on him after all. If he'd have been a different kind of person, he could have easily used it. I think we went back there maybe one more time in the daylight, but it didn't have the same vibe to it anymore. I've since moved away and haven't seen those guys in years, but I do wonder if they're still as weirded out as I am about that night. When I was a teenager, I was coming back from a quinceañera late at night, with my aunt and her boyfriend. My cousin and me all packed into the car. At one point we had to stop at a red light set in the middle of the road on a median, and that is where I saw her. There was a woman standing there right in the median wearing a white dress. It looked worn and kind of torn in places, not like something you'd see anyone walking around in. She was making motions with her hands like she was trying to get cars to stop, like she expected someone to pull over. We all noticed her at the same time. I remember my aunt saying something like, maybe she'd come from a costume party or an event, and everyone just kind of went along with that. No one questioned it. It didn't even cross our minds in that moment. It may or may not have been a time of year for that kind of thing to appear. Lights changed and we drove off, no one paying her any more mind. It wasn't until years later that I heard about Resurrection Mary. When I read about her, it immediately brought back the memory of that night. The location and the white dress. It felt eerily similar. The story about Resurrection Mary describes her as a blonde, and the woman we saw definitely had dark hair. My husband used to work in Summit, not far from Resurrection Cemetery, and I have driven past that area at all hours since then without seeing anything unusual. Still, that night has always stuck with me. I wonder if I did see Resurrection Mary or another spirit, or perhaps it was just someone in costume. Who knows? Let me begin by saying I am in no way a ghost hunter. I'm a fan of ghost hunting shows, and I've had numerous paranormal experiences and some ghost encounters. So ghost hunting has always been something I've thought I'd be good at, but in truth I'm kind of nervous to do it more than I have. I don't use any fancy equipment, but an app that's called GhostTube. Before that, I use a different app for a few fun scares at sleepovers, and I got so freaked out by these apps I ended up deleting them after use. This app was one of the newer ones, and supposedly the best one so far. While I was visiting France, my friend wanted to visit the Père Lachaise Cemetery, one of the largest cemeteries in the world. It is home to a few famous people such as Oscar Wilde, who was the entire reason my friend wanted to go there in the first place. When we visited, I thought it would be fun to try ghost talk. My friend thought it was kind of silly, but she knows I like spooky stuff, so she just rolled with it. About a minute in, I get a response. Okay, cool. With these apps, I realize your phone can hear you and probably see things via the camera too. So I take responses with a grain of salt normally. I'm not thinking too much of it, nor is my friend. However, as we walk, the response becomes more frequent and I begin to talk back. And that's when the responses really picked up. I want to note here, I do have a history of psychics in the family. I like to think I have a bit of an ability, but mostly energy related. I have never felt like I was in danger with anyone who's responded to me. If anything, it felt like they were just taking a walk with us. And here's a breakdown of how the interactions went. Table. I laughed. There was no table around, so I just kept walking. I lived here. This one caught my attention. I responded, did you live near here or somewhere else in France? Response, I'm not from here. Me. Oh, so you lived here, but you weren't from here? Is that why you're speaking English? At this point, I felt like this was a man speaking to me, just a feeling, and they said, stop interrupting. Okay, it was definitely a man. My friend and I started laughing and we said we'd be quiet. After that, it felt like the person, presumably annoyed, left us. We passed by a mausoleum with a caved-in floor leading into a black hole. We commented on it. Oh, that's creepy. We got a response. Basement. Yeah, it must lead to somewhere deep like a basement, I said. That must be eerie. Immediately, I got the response, Not necessarily. At this point, my friend started to look at my phone, like she couldn't believe that was happening. I got the feeling we were being joined by a woman. She followed us. It was a feeling like she was walking directly behind us, keeping pace, like if I stopped too quickly, she'd run into me. "Mother," she said. "Were you a mother?" I asked, "or is your mother here?" "Innocent," it replied. I forgot what I said in response, but I quickly got the comment, "Psychic?" My friend looked over at me wide-eyed. I laughed and said, "No, I'm not psychic. I just have this device. It shows you when you want to talk to me. So please continue to talk if you want." "Yeah, well listen," my friend said. We walked on. I commented on various graves and how pretty they were, or how sad I was about some being covered up or broken due to vandalism. As we passed one grave, I saw it was an angel, and a very nice grave. "At least it's a pretty grave," I said. That's when we heard the device say, "It's what I want." "Really?" "Assuredly," the device replied. As we passed more graves, we got more replies. "Suffering." We said how sorry we were that they were feeling that way and we wish we could help. We even asked them if they could help us find Oscar Wilde's grave, seeing as this cemetery was big as a town. To this we got no response, but ended up finding his grave. It was about 20 minutes to closing time when the cemetery was due to close, and they would give a 10-minute warning by ringing a bell. That was the cue for visitors to head for the exit, otherwise you'd risk getting trapped in. Though I'm sure security would do surveillance after closing, but due to the size of the place it would probably take them a good while to find you, if they did in fact come looking for you at all. Oscar Wilde's grave had sadly been put behind glass due to people defacing it. All over the glass were lipstick marks, and even on the other side were small things people had thrown over the glass wall, such as notes and little toys. There were quite a few people around this grave when we heard the bell chime. As everyone left, we stayed for a moment so my friend could say something to him. I assured her it might not be him, because quite frankly I don't know if I'd hang around my grave if people kept ruining it, but we tried anyway. She told Oscar that she was a big fan, and that he's still very widely adored, but also that there was a gay-themed bar after him somewhere, and we got the response, hot. We died. Guess he was okay with the gay bar. I then asked, "Is there anything you want to tell us?" And the response was, "Please go." We agreed and immediately walked away, realizing there was no one else around and the bell was now chiming. "I'm walking," the device said. "You're welcome to walk with us to the exit," I said, and a few cobblestone paths later we made it to the exit on time. I said maybe he was saying please go so we'd make it out on time. I actually felt like something followed me back to our hotel. I felt a heavy weight on me and was exhausted, and my brain felt cloudy and didn't feel right. I was afraid the app would notify me of more responses, so I deleted it. That night, I felt watched. However, I'm happy to say the next morning I felt much better and lighter. Maybe whatever followed me realized I wasn't listening anymore and left. Not sure why, but I felt like it was the woman who talked to us a bunch before. Nothing malicious, she just wanted to be heard. I hope you enjoyed my stories. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. I hope that you have enjoyed tonight's collection of cemetery stories. It has been a good one. So just for those of you who might not be familiar or maybe don't listen to the end every time, I am going to be doing alternating Saturday videos. Next week will be a compilation just like last week, and the week after I have programmed a kind of funky episode called Security Cameras. I might actually include the footage, but it's creepy stuff that's been captured. So I think it's going to be a really interesting video. Hopefully you guys enjoy it. I haven't recorded it yet, but the stories are quite promising. But with that being said, that is it for the week. I will see you again on Monday if you listen to the Mortis Media Mort's Bedtime Stories podcast over on all podcasting places, and if not, you will see me again on Tuesday for even more spooks. I believe the Tuesday video is Railroad? Pretty sure it's Railroad. Yeah, train and railroad stories. Again, not a super popular topic. but one I think is actually really interesting with some hella spooky stories. Anyway, have a wonderful weekend, friends. Stay awesome. Oh, and I wanted to give one final thank you to my members and patrons whose names you can see on screen. And if you'd like to get a bunch of exclusive content, you can follow links in the description to find out more. But for now, stay awesome, my friends, and good night.
I'll be the first to admit that I'm one of the most skeptical people I know. I don't believe in ghosts or any other paranormal stuff. I'm quick to dismiss stories that seem fake, or at the very least fabricated. That's why I'm completely at a loss for words at what happened to me just weeks ago. I wanted to write all of this while it was fresh in my mind. I can't explain what happened to me, and to be honest, I'm still terrified. I thought to myself, maybe if I write what happened to me and share it with the internet, maybe someone out there can explain what happened. Well, hopefully somebody out there can explain. My friend Steve and his wife were going out of town for the weekend for their anniversary. The two of them don't travel alone a lot because they have 2 children and a dog. I know for some people that's a first world problem, and you're correct, but Steve isn't struggling financially. He built this massive home in the middle of nowhere because he likes privacy, and if you're fortunate enough to do that, I can't blame you. Well, for Steve and his wife, the stars were about to align perfectly. The 2 kids were going out of town for some type of school trip, so they were going to be alone with just the dog. When Steve told me all of this, I insisted on going over and watching the dog for the weekend so he and his wife could go on a romantic weekend getaway. He agreed, and the plan was set in stone. I would be watching his beautiful golden retriever for the weekend. I made my way to the house on Friday afternoon. I didn't work weekends, so I planned on just staying there Friday through Sunday. Steve stocked the house full of food and snacks for me and made sure I had everything I needed. It was a bit overkill for a weekend pet sitting job, but I wasn't complaining. I love dogs and I love quiet weekends, so win-win for me. Now for the scary part. On Friday night, the dog and I just hung out and watched movies. Steve sent me a text around 9 p.m. and said, "Don't get scared being all alone in that house. It can get pretty spooky at night when you're by yourself." I gave him a single LOL text back and told him to shut up. As I said before, I'm a very skeptical person. I don't get scared of empty houses or being alone in the middle of nowhere. I'm well aware that anything can happen, so I just don't get scared easily. I slept in the spare bedroom, and Steve's dog came with me. We went to bed around 1 a.m. At 3:21 in the morning, I woke up to the sound of the dog barking downstairs. It was that loud and vicious barking. I won't lie, that actually did scare me. But more of the surprise scare, not that scared out of my skin kind of scare. I made my way downstairs, and the entire time, the dog never stopped barking. I finally found the dog in the kitchen barking at the door that led to the basement. All the hair on his back was standing straight up, and the dog looked incredibly spooked by something. I was calling his name and trying to calm him down, but he just wouldn't stop barking. I grabbed the doorknob, and this sent the dog into a spiral. He was now running back and forth barking and just going insane. Of course, my first thought was maybe some kind of intruder in the basement. Possible, but unlikely. Steve has all that super fancy security equipment, so breaking in is not something that's easy. I grabbed a big knife from the kitchen and opened the door. The dog ran to the doorway but didn't go down into the basement. He just stood at the frame and growled, his hair still sticking straight up. I turned the light on and descended the stairs. I started yelling a bunch of stuff, pretending to be a lot tougher than I am, but I heard or saw nothing down there. I tried calling the dog down into the basement, but he wasn't moving. I even went as far as to look all around the basement to give my mind some peace. It's a finished basement, so I looked in closets in every corner, behind furniture, and even in the bathroom that's down there. No intruder and no evil ghosts. The only thing I did notice was how unreasonably cold it was down there. I know it's a basement, but I've been down there a million times, and it's not that cold. Even in the dead of winter, it's never that cold. At the end of the day, a cold basement is no reason to freak out and run away. I spent the rest of the night in the living room. It took a while, but the dog finally calmed down, and we both fell asleep again. The next day, the dog was completely fine. We played outside for a while, and I just spent most of the day listening to music and watching movies. I went down in the basement at one point during the day, and the temperature was completely normal. It felt like the rest of the house. I didn't really spend much time giving it thought, and just went about the rest of the day. That night, I decided to stay on the couch, just in case the dog had another basement door incident. I wanted to stay up later, but I ended up falling asleep while watching a movie. Once again, at almost the exact same time, I woke up to the dog throwing a fit and barking like the house was on fire or something. I stormed into the kitchen, and again, I tried getting the dog to stop barking, but he wouldn't listen for the second night in a row. But this night was different. I didn't think it was possible, but the dog was even more erratic that night than he was on the previous night. I knew nothing was down there, so I told him repeatedly that it was okay. It was like I wasn't even there. When I grabbed the doorknob this time, instead of continuing to bark, he started to cry and whimper. It was the strangest thing. I let go of the knob, and when I tried to console the dog, he started barking again. I was annoyed and confused. One last time, I grabbed the knob and went downstairs. Again, the dog started to cry and still wouldn't follow me into the basement. This time was different. It was still cold down there, just like the previous night, but this time it stunk so badly. I don't know how to describe the smell other than just bad, but perhaps the weirdest thing was that some of the pictures he had on the wall of his family were knocked over, and the bar stools down there were also knocked to the ground. Other than that, nothing else was misplaced or destroyed. I picked up the bar stools and also the pictures and just set them on the bar. The smell was so overbearing that I didn't even want to be down there anymore. I went back upstairs, and for the first 30 minutes or so, the dog continued to bark, and I tried to figure out what could be the reason for the smell. When the dog finally calmed down, I gave him a treat and we both fell asleep. When I woke up in the morning, I went into the basement to try to get to the bottom of the smell, but the smell was gone, not even a lingering odor. Also, the dog followed me down, and he was happy as can be. For 2 nights, that dog refused to come into the basement with me, but today, he went down there without a care in the world. I was completely stumped. I had no clue what had happened the previous 2 nights. Steve got home around 1 in the morning, and as you may expect, his dog was jumping for joy. His wife took the dog outside, and I started catching up with Steve for a bit. He asked how everything was, and I told him that, for the most part, everything was great. He gave me a confused look when I said for the most part, so I explained in detail what happened over the weekend. I totally expected him to laugh and assume I was playing a joke on him, but he didn't laugh. He didn't even smile. He just stood there. He finally looked down and told me that, occasionally, when the dog was a puppy, he would have these barking fits and just go crazy barking at that door. Apparently, he hadn't done it in years, so Steve forgot about it. They never knew the reason, but then one night, he just stopped doing it. I could tell Steve was freaked out, a lot more freaked out than I was. We talked about it for a little longer, but ultimately, I kept telling Steve not to worry, and it's probably nothing. It's been 2 weeks, and I have not been able to stop thinking about it. Steve told me that since they've been home, the dog has been completely normal and has had no basement door episodes. I've tried looking into it myself, but I haven't found anything that could logically explain what happened. Just when I think I may have found something that sort of explains what happened, once I add everything up, it doesn't make sense. So what's the deal? Can someone out there explain to me why that dog was acting this way? What was the smell, and where did it come from? I need help, people. I'm losing sleep, and I don't even live in that house. I just want some sort of answer. I don't know if this is considered your typical scary story, but it's definitely freaky and very unnerving. The more time that's gone by, the scarier it becomes for me. I'd love to share it and see what people think. It was a few years ago now. I had just broken up with my boyfriend and moved into this cute little apartment. It was an entire apartment complex. The complex itself was beautiful, quiet, and elegant. I quickly made friends with neighbors and several of the other tenants. It was just a nice and friendly little community. A few months into my lease, I thought I heard the sound of running coming from the hallway one night when I was getting ready for bed. I looked out the peephole of the door, but didn't see anything. There weren't any kids in my building, so I couldn't imagine who would be running at that hour. But strange things happened, so I didn't question. The next few nights, I heard the sound again. I didn't get up and look because it just didn't seem that important to me at the time. It's worth noting that my apartment is on the ground level, and my windows face a beautiful courtyard. The door to the apartment is still inside the building, and you need a key to get into the building. It took a little while to get used to the windows being at ground level at first, because if you wanted to, you could come right up to my bedroom window. I will say that I wasn't worried about anybody in this community doing that. I'm just stating that it was something on my mind when I first moved in. However, that information is about to become relevant because one night I woke up to what sounded like giggling outside my bedroom window. It was weird for sure, but I just figured some kids were acting stupid and hanging out too close to my window. I tapped the window glass and made a loud shushing noise. The giggling stopped for just a second, and then a faint tapping sound could be heard on the other side of the glass. It freaked me out, but I wasn't about to let some kids have that satisfaction over me. Once I composed myself, I grabbed the curtain and whipped it open. There was nobody there. I was looking at the quiet night courtyard and nothing more. Even if some kids were out there, I have no idea where they would have gone that fast. I closed the curtain and shrugged it off. I wasn't about to let some kids ruin my sleep. This weird giggling outside my window continued for a few nights. I just learned to ignore it. I have young nieces and nephews, and usually when I ignore their stupid pranks, they stop doing whatever they're doing. That was my plan with these giggling kids. I assumed that if I just stopped acknowledging them, they would stop trying to mess with me, and unless they gave me a reason to report them, I wasn't going to bother the apartment complex manager with this. I think it was 2 days later while I was at work that I received an email from the complex manager. She seemed short in the email. She asked if I could stop at the main office when I got home from work. She had to show me something, and she claimed it was urgent. I told her I could stop by after work. I remember all day long being stressed about it. I was worried my rent money didn't clear or something like that. When I showed up, she told me to lock the door. She started talking quietly, almost in a whisper. This one guy who works in the security office came in and sat next to me. The manager told me that while the security guard was monitoring some footage, he came across this. She showed me security camera footage of the hallway where my apartment is located. Around 2 a.m, 2 small hooded figures approached my door. They looked about the size of children who were maybe around 10 or 12. They were just standing there in the grainy footage. It looked like they were standing about an inch away from the door. The scariest part of this was that when she fast-forwarded the footage, they didn't move at all. It was nearly 10 minutes of them just standing extremely close to my apartment door. Before they finally walked away, one of the small figures reached for the doorknob and tried opening the door. You can clearly see them jostling the door a few times, but it doesn't open. After the 10 minutes in the video, they skip away from the sight of the camera. I was finally freaked out. Whoever these kids were, they were targeting me for some reason. I told the security officer and the manager about the window incident, but when they looked back at the footage, they found nothing. We still called the police and gave them a statement. They said if anything else happens, give them a call, but at that point, there really was nothing they could do. The security officer attempted to see if they could find out where the kids skipped off to when they left my apartment door, but it's almost like they vanished. They couldn't find them on any other camera on the entire complex. The next night, I decided to stay awake. I was going to catch these kids one way or another. But that night, there was nothing. No giggles and no sounds from the hall. It was about a week later, and I heard something coming from the hall. It was about 1:30 in the morning. I muted the TV and listened intently. I heard the sound of my doorknob rattling around. It was happening. The kids were back at my door. I ran over nervously and yelled for them to get away. I could hear a child laughing, and then another soft child voice whisper, "Mom, we're home. Just open the door and let us in." I didn't say anything. I looked through the peephole and just saw 2 small figures with their heads down. The voice whispered again, "Please let us in. We're home now, please." That last please that the child said almost sounded desperate. I didn't care. I yelled that their mother doesn't live here anymore and that I was going to call the cops. Both kids started to giggle. Then the doorknob started to shake again. One of the kids started throwing their body into the door, but it wouldn't budge. I stood there holding the door for a minute. I didn't hear laughing anymore, and the doorknob wasn't shaking. When I looked one last time, nobody was out there. I was still too afraid to open the door, just in case they were just outside of my view. I called the police, and the cops were quick to assume it was just the local kids playing a prank on me. I didn't argue with that because it seemed like the most logical explanation. I finished with my statement, and that was that. A few days later, I ran into the apartment manager in the parking lot. She pulled me aside and asked if I had experienced anything since that last time. I told her no, and that I was sure it was just some local kids. She made a weird face and told me she wasn't so sure. She told me that the woman who lived in the apartment before me was strange. She didn't give me a whole bunch of information for privacy reasons, but she was fairly confident that something horrible happened with that woman's children. She didn't elaborate or give any details. She didn't even give me the name. She just implied that something horrible happened and left it at that. She said that she had already said too much and she didn't want to get into trouble for sharing personal information. She told me to be careful and just keep locking my doors. I'll never forget her walking away saying, "This wasn't a prank." To my knowledge, I don't think those kids ever visited my apartment again while I was there. I've spent some time trying to figure out exactly what happened, like who these kids were and what the apartment manager meant. Was she implying that these kids were like ghosts or something? I know that seems insane, and I'm sure that's not what it is, but you have to admit, it is strange. It's weird to me that the police and the security officer couldn't find where these kids went after they left my apartment. Something that dawned on me after I had already moved out was something I had overlooked. There should have been no way for the kids to get inside the apartment building without a key. As I said before, there were no kids that lived in my specific building. So how did they get in? Where did they go? As time goes on and I reflect on this story, I get more freaked out. It's amazing to me that I wasn't more scared in the moment. I'm years removed and don't even live there anymore, and I'm more scared today writing this than I was when I experienced it. I still don't believe in ghosts or anything paranormal, but I can't explain exactly what it was. Neighborhood kids are the easy solution, but the more I replay the memories in my head, the more impossible that seems. I know how this story sounds, but I think it's worth sharing. Maybe I really did have an experience with something not from this world. This story I'm about to share happened to me around 10 years ago. It's without a doubt one of the most terrifying things that's ever happened to me. I recently stopped telling people this story because most of the time people tell me I'm lying or making it up. It was my wife who pushed me to write this down and share it. She said maybe somebody out there has gone through a similar experience, so here it is. Back then, I worked at a dead-end job. Just like most of us, it was a way to make ends meet. The mundane drag of retail work was beginning to drain the life from me. One afternoon, when I was leaving work, I noticed something neon pink hanging from my car door handle. It was a sticky note with a friendly message written. It simply said, "You're special, and I hope you have an amazing day." It also had a smiley face sticker attached to the note. I thought it was nice and it made me smile. Other than that, I didn't give it another thought at that moment. The next few days, when I left work, I would have a message attached to a note in the same spot. I know some people have told me that it's creepy and weird, but I liked the attention. At that point in my life, I wasn't getting attention very often, so it was nice to be seen. After 3 or 4 friendly messages, I decided I was going to leave a message on my door this time. When I parked for work that morning, I grabbed my own sticky notes and wrote a message. I kept things friendly, while also walking that line of being a little flirtatious. When I left work that afternoon, I was happy to find another note. The flirt worked because this person started flirting right back. I didn't know if this was a joke or if it was serious, but either way, I kept the charade going for a few days. The shift before I had a day off, I left a note saying something along the lines of, "Don't miss me too much on my day off." When I left work, I had a sticky note that just had a sad face drawn on it. This is where I thought the game would end for good. Somebody was having fun with me, I gave in, and now that I was going to be off, I figured it would just fizzle out. I couldn't have been more wrong. When I woke up the next day, I did some stuff around the house. It was late morning when I went outside for the first time. I noticed something neon pink on the car door again. I couldn't believe my eyes. I tentatively approached the note. It said, "You look cute when you're sleeping." This scared me. After a little while, I concluded that someone was messing with me. It clearly was someone I worked with who knew where I lived. It was the only thing that made sense to me. I crumpled the note up and threw it away. When I returned to work, the notes continued for a few days. They started friendly, but by the 3rd day of my not responding anymore, they started to get mean. The friendly messages were now saying things like, "You better answer me," and "Remember, I know where you live." I thought about calling the police, but I was still so sure that it was somebody I knew messing with me. I decided to leave a note the next morning. I wrote a message saying to leave me alone, or I would call the police. I didn't really have plans to call the police, but if it were really somebody I knew, I thought that this would be when they finally came forward, or at least stopped with the notes. When I left work that afternoon, I noticed that my note was gone, and for the first time in a while, I had no new notes on my door. I felt relieved. I still wanted to know who it was, but if the note stopped, I was happy. That night, I woke up at some point in the middle of the night because I thought I heard something. Ever since the note outside, I was on edge. I sat in bed for a minute, just sitting silently, trying to listen. Then I heard something again. It sounded a little like shuffling, but it was hard to tell if it was just the house making noises or if it was something more alarming. I assumed I was just hearing things, but I wasn't taking any chances. I grabbed a baseball bat and made my way down the long hallway from my bedroom to the open living room. Every step I took, I started thinking the worst. If a person were standing in my house, I don't think I would have been able to hit them with the bat I was holding. I just am not that type of person. I made it to the end of the hallway and just stopped. Whatever bravery I had when I left my room was gone. If you're standing at the end of the hall, you can see my living room, dining room, and kitchen. I turned on the dimmable lights and scanned the room from where I was standing. I was too scared to move any further. I kept imagining somebody hiding behind the couch or something. I stood in silence for a minute or so, and I heard nothing. I turned the lights off and briskly walked back to the bedroom. At any point, I expected somebody to charge after me, but thankfully that didn't happen. I locked my bedroom door and turned on the TV. I wanted to drown out the noise of nothingness. I ended up falling asleep eventually. When I woke up that morning, I almost forgot about how scared I was. I walked to the fridge to grab some juice, and that's when I saw it. A bright pink sticky note was stuck to the fridge that said, "You can't keep me away," with another smiley face attached after that statement. After being frozen for about 30 seconds, I ran to check every door and window in my house, and they all were still locked. I know for a fact that nobody had a key to my house. My family lives in another state, and I'm not close enough with anyone here to trust them with a key. Somehow, this person got inside my house and left a message on the fridge. I wasn't playing around anymore. I called the police and gave them the info. They claimed to have done an investigation, but they weren't able to get any useful information. Unfortunately, random notes were not a lot for them to go off of. At least that's what they said. They did try to check the cameras in the parking lot where I work, but where I park, the cameras don't reach. The employee parking spaces are on the side of the store, and there are no cameras there. The police concluded that it had to be someone who knew me. I would have agreed if it were not for the note inside my house. I'm a freak when it comes to locking my door, so I know that nobody had access to getting inside the house. I stayed at a friend's house for a couple nights just because I wasn't ready to sleep at my place yet. We ended up going to the hardware store and bought all new locks for the doors. That first night back at my place, my friend stayed over with me, and nothing happened that night. A few months had gone by, and nothing happened. No new notes at work, and nothing at my house. It was over 2 months later when I left for work one morning, and I noticed one of the horrible pink notes on my front door. I grabbed the note, and it said, "I guess you don't want to play anymore." I called the police right away, but they didn't do much. I invested in cameras after that, but nothing ever happened again. Changing the locks in my house might have saved my life. Somehow this person had to have had a key to my house. It's the only thing that makes sense to me. What I can't figure out is why me, and who was that person? Whenever I think back about that entire situation, I almost get sick. I think back to the night I heard something inside the house. There had to have been a person hiding somewhere, just inches or feet from where I was standing. Why didn't they harm me then? I wonder if messing around with me was all this person wanted. A friend once told me that when I went back to the room and locked the door, it's possible that this person tried to get into the room, but locking the door may have saved my life. It's been 10 years and nothing has happened since that last note. I've since moved and I'm married now. Every time I see those stupid pink sticky notes, I always think back to that horrible experience. Whatever the case may be, I'm just happy I'm still here to tell the story.